broken so long. I started to think it was my natural state. When they said you just have to battle all, tears turned to eyes as they ran down my face. You might blame it on the winter when life goes underground to grow. I'm just waiting for my springtime to melt the snow. I need to find my sweetness, dig deep beneath all this mess. So sick and tired, free and no thorns. Where are the roses that from heart earth are born? I need to find strength and weakness, turn from cowardly to fearless, give up criticizing and scorn, and see the golden lining behind every stone. What does it mean to be here in real life? Something so sweet about those scenes most rush to delete. Why don't we meet where the sunshine fills our eyes, where the crickets serenade us as we sippin' lemonade and breathe the heat on pines and watch the evening fade. And we won't miss all our mirrors, 'cause this is more than glass can give us. Surely this is where our stories all get made. Oh,
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the ever compassionate. I begin this in the name of love, in the name of light, in the name of goodness, and certainly in the name of God, in this heart of mine. I would say it's nice to see you all. but I'll just say it's nice to be seen. And it's so good to have you here with me.
Peace and love, everyone, and welcome again to another session of our weekly show, Rahat al-Arwah, the Tranquility of Spirits, Arabic music between spirituality and tradition, or tradition and spirituality. My name is Ali Hussain, and we are joined this week with another theme, this time having to do with gratitude, or which is the positive counterpart to the vice of being discontent with the divine decree. And the little improv that I played for you right now is in one of the really central maqams in Arabic music called maqam bayati, and it's another maqam that has this microtonal property. It begins on, it's a maqam that's usually rooted in D or Re, and it's D, E half flat, F, G, A, and either B flat or B half flat, in which case it's known as maqam Hussaini, then C and D. And like we talked about last week with maqam Rast, there is this possibility of modulation while improving on maqam bayati, and the same sort of modulation that we did last time, where on the fifth degree, in this case it's actually the fourth degree. G is the fourth degree in maqam bayati, but it's the fifth degree in maqam rast, because maqam rast begins on C, middle C. The fourth degree is the modulation point in maqam bayati, and really in most maqams that are rooted in the degree of Re, of D. So the normal progression of the maqam, the scale, shall we say, is, as we said, it's or, but this G, which is known as the ghammaz, the dominant of the maqam, you can use it to modulate to other maqams. So for example, we can go from bayati, which is this is the jins, this is the root four note, like the bottom four notes is known as the root of the maqam. So the root of the maqam is bayati. And then we can modulate from here to Hijaz, which is the same modulation that we did last time when we were improving on maqam rast. So it becomes like this. And this modulation, the maqam, becomes known as not just bayati, but bayati shuri. If you remember last week, we said that maqam rast, if you modulate on the fifth degree to Hijaz, it becomes known as maqam suznak. And here, maqam bayati, if you modulate on the fourth degree, again G, it becomes known as bayati shuri. You can also, there is a maqam called bayatiyan, or two bayatis, which is basically a bayati on the lower root is bayati, and then the top jins is also bayati. So there is all these different modulations that are possible. So we can do with maqam bayati, and maqam bayati is one of those maqams in Arabic music that has a very nostalgic, at least for me, and I think it also does for many people and many musicians. It has this also kind of nostalgic property, nostalgic characteristic. And bayati, I believe, or I feel, because it has this nostalgic characteristic, I feel as though the word bayati comes from the word bait or baytuta, which means homeliness, right? And for in the art of Quran recitation, which is very rich and a rich sort of phenomenon in Egyptian culture, the art of reciting Quran according to maqamat, these melodies, Maqam bayati is usually the maqam that many reciters begin with, right? They begin with maqam bayati. And then they transition to other maqams and they end with maqam bayati as well. This is not true with Arabic music. Arabic music can begin with any maqam. It can begin with bayati, it can begin with rast, it can begin with any maqam, but usually in Quran recitation it begins with bayati and it ends with bayati. So for example, my favorite reciter, Mustafa Ismail, he would usually read, like for example, from Surah Al-Imran, he would say something like, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله اصطفى آدم ونوحا وآل إبراهيم وآل عمران على العالمين. So this is Maqam Bayati, and this is how Mustafa Ismail, one of the most well-known Egyptian reciters in the 20th century, this is the way he would begin his recitation in Maqam Bayati, and then he would transition to other maqams. So I hope you've found these sort of little short lessons on Arabic music and improv. And again, I don't even consider myself a beginner. This is just a weak man's half-sleeved attempt at improving in Arabic music, but it's done genuinely out of love. So I hope you found these beginning bits beneficial. So this week we are continuing with our final sort of theme for this first season of Race Karma, and our theme for this week is gratitude. Right, and I want us to begin by sort of thinking about a question for this week, right? And really, this is a question that we can ask for all of the themes that we've covered throughout, these past 4 episodes. It's a theme about negative. It's a question that can apply to negative thoughts. It's a question that can apply to the idea of fear of death and the eternal life. It's a question that can apply to gratitude and presence, which we talked about last week. And the question is, what does gratitude sound like, right? And this is a question that a musician or someone aspiring musician like me, or someone who's very deeply invested in music, this is my question, which is, what does gratitude sound like? And a painter would ask, or should ask, what is the color of gratitude? And a wordsmith, a poet might ask, what is the poem of gratitude? Right? If gratitude was poetry, what would it look like? What would it sound? What would that poem look like when it's recited? And inversely, of course, we can ask, what does discontent sound like? Or what is the color of discontent? What does presence sound like? What is the color? What does lack of presence sound like? These kinds of questions that are sort of paradoxical, I feel that they're really at the heart of the creative process, right? Because if you remember what we talked about, last week, and this is sort of a theme that we've been discussing throughout the past few weeks, is that the art is essentially a process, or the artist is a translator, right? So art is a translation process, and the artist is a translator who translates an ineffable, infinite, divine inspiration into tangible drops in the form of sounds or melodies, in the form of colors, and in the form of words, or in any other form. It could be food, it could be whatever it is, or martial arts, certain moves and forms, and so on and so forth. But the important thing is that it's a translation process. And of course, there is this paradox in this translation process, because you're translating what is ineffable into something that is effable. You're translating what is infinite into something that is finite. So essentially, the artist is always at the meeting point between opposites, or at the meeting point between contradictions. The Muslim saint Ibn Arabi, in his Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, in his book Magnum Opus, the Meccan Openings, he always quotes another saint, a predecessor of his, whose name was Abu Sa'id al-Kharraz, who is thought to have said, when he was asked, Abu Sa'id al-Kharraz, he was asked, where did you find God? And he responded, I found him at the meeting of opposites. Because the meeting point between opposites, between black and white, between here and there, between the infinite and the finite, that meeting point is where the mind stops, is where logic ends, and where rationality sort of succumbs or submits, right? And that's exactly the point where God can be found. Because that's the point where we have to activate higher, where we have to use or resort to higher forms of intellection other than rationality and reason. And the first of these is the heart. The first of these is having this sort of idea of emotional intelligence, right? And then if we're able to, and then we even surpass the heart and we begin to think with our spirits. So we're returning again to the theme of mastering the craft and achieving presence, which we talked about last week, that first you sort of get to this idea that they call consciously competent, which is that you're engaging with your craft, with your art form through your mind, and then you transcend that and you're able to express yourself through the craft, and that's using the heart. You're approaching and you're intellecting through the heart. And then you get to the place where you're present through your craft, with your craft, and that's where you are intellecting through your spirit, and so on and so forth. But that's essentially what art is all about, and the artist. They're residing at the point, at the meeting point between opposites. Right? And music, I feel, has this sort of ability to convey meaning in a way that is holistic, organic, and completely present. And it's one of those things where whatever you hear is what you get. So I was reading these quotes yesterday, and actually watching some TED Talks by musicians. And one TED Talk was by a musician about, the topic was music as a personal language. And he said that music is a language direct to experience. There is no buffer in music. And then he quoted another composer who said that music, and I'm paraphrasing, that music has this idea of perfect purity, which is that words and language sort of approximate meaning. They're doing tawaf, they're doing a pilgrimage around meaning, words, right? If we were to think about the theme and the metaphor of pilgrimage, Hajj, around the Kaaba, as sort of being art forms, so language sort of circumambulates around meaning, the Kaaba of meaning, whereas music resides inside. Now, of course, this means that we're granting music a higher status. But there is a compromise in a sense. although music is very direct, it is giving you meaning. It is not approximating meaning. It is giving you meaning. The thing about music is that it's non-translatable. It is what it is. It's a very primordial experience. It is a very visceral experience. It is pure life, right? And in reality, actually, in what we might call sacred history, the idea, the history of scriptures, according to sacred religious history, is that the original scripture was music, right? And even someone, a Muslim saint like Ibn Arabi, he describes the emergence of language through the human being, through our vocal cords, as being a process of turning music into words, right? Because if we take a sound and we cut it up into at specific points and we shape it and we make it either high or low, what we end up getting is music, is words. So that is why even in Islam, in the Islamic tradition, the Prophet David, peace be upon him, he is known as having been given sort of the ability to sing, the flute of Dawood. And in the Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whenever he wanted to praise someone who had a beautiful voice, he would tell them, you have been given a flute or a neigh, like the neigh of the people of David. And of course, I'm reminded now of our fellow artist peer, Danny Darling, who beautifully sang Hallelujah. In the last session, she was speaking about the story of Prophet David. So this idea, so the Psalms of David and their richness in music and sound actually represents sort of the primordial scripture. And then later on, scripture became this sort of, became words. And in the Quran, the idea is to combine both aspects. It is melodious words. And as we mentioned before, that there is a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says, whoever does not melodiously sing the Quran, he is not one of us. That the idea is in the Quran, melody is actually inseparable from the words. Meaning is unlocked through, the meaning of the words of the Quran is unlocked through melody. Right? So we have this idea of the artist at the juncture. The artist is always at the point of tension, at the meeting point between heavens and earth, between the spirit and the body, between the seen and the unseen. And to use a Quranic metaphor that is used oftentimes by Muslim saints, between the fresh water and the salty water. Right? So the artist is what is known in Arabic as a barzakh, which would roughly translate to purgatory, but it's not. The literal English translation for it is isthmus. But it's a really difficult word. It's not used very often. So usually we could use the word interstice or threshold. Right? So the artist is like in a hallway between in this contradiction. And he's channeling, or she's channeling back and forth. Right? And now we get to the idea of gratitude. So what does gratitude mean in terms of everything that we said, this translation process, this idea of being present? And like last week, I would like to sort of delve deep into the subject of gratitude for the artist by reading one of the reflections from my book, Art and Memoirs, Setting Forth. And again, I will read it in Arabic and then I will read the translation in English. And the title of this reflection in Arabic is Shukr I'taq Fan. الشكر الذي يستحقه الفن هو بسبب السخاء الذي يضحي من خلاله بنفسه في سبيل كل الأرواح المتعطشة. فكلما كانت الأجساد والنفوس مظلومة كلما تلقت نظرة خاصة من منبع الإبداع. ومن خلال عملية إلباس الفقراء بالأنوار والأسرار يتوجه الفن نحو مثل هذه القلوب المنكسرة على أنها لوحات فارغة وجاهزة للرسم، أو كمسرح ينتظر أداء متكامل. وبعد ذلك تحول هذه الموجودات المنكسرة إلى معزوفة تجسد معاني المعاناة التي تجملت بعبيق النصر والمداواة. Gratitude, redemption, art. Gratitude is shown towards art for the selflessness through which it grants itself to all thirsty spirits. The more distraught bodies and souls receive a special gaze from the spring of creativity. In the process of dressing the downtrodden with its lights and secrets, art approaches these broken hearts like empty canvases and a stage awaiting a masterful performance. Then, art transforms these sundered beings into a symphony of a tragic suffering made beautiful by the fragrance of redemption. So, what I sort of allude to in this excerpt is that gratitude has a lot to do with justice, right? And I ask the question in this reflection, why does art, or why should we be grateful towards art? Or why does art as a blessing deserve our gratitude? The reason is because art does not distinguish between the poor and the wealthy, between the sick and the healthy, between the believer and the non-believer. Art is divine will enacting itself, that revelation needs to manifest, and it will go through whichever channel is suitable. So, but specifically what art does, the most humbling experience of experiencing art is witnessing art giving itself and giving of itself to the brokenhearted. And this is, of course, seen in people who, in the fact that some of the most brilliant artists throughout human history have been people with deep traumatic experiences and who went through tremendous suffering. You know, we look at someone like Beethoven, for example, who was abused as a child and grew up deaf, and he composed the most divine of symphonies and musical pieces that has ever graced the human spirit, right? And the process itself of being an artist. So becoming an artist is usually built on suffering, but even being an artist is a process of suffering. Why? Because you are at these meeting points between heavens and earth. You are the point of collapse, where everything collapses on everything. There is a Muslim saint from Morocco, his name is Abdul Aziz Dabbagh, and he says that the spiritual opening, when it comes to a saint, the weight of that opening is like a mountain falling on top of a hair. The hair cannot withstand, it's crushed under the weight of that mountain. And the only way that a saint is able to withstand the power of a spiritual opening is through divine grace. And that magnitude, or that sort of heaviness of being an artist is, or of the spiritual opening, is exactly also the process of art. Because we are receiving the infinite, and we ourselves are finite. And we are receiving the infinite like that mountain. And we are but a very small speck of dust in the grand scheme of things. We are the hair, and we have to take that mountain speck by speck and give it to the people in a beautiful form. And we may ask, well, what is that? Why is suffering married to art? And this returns us to the idea of separation, which we discussed, I believe, in the episode on fear of death, that Maulana Rumi begins the Mathnavi by talking about the reed, how it is separated from the reed bed. That initial separation that the reed experiences in its journey towards becoming a ney, a flute, that separation is the root behind every symbol of suffering that exists on the face of the earth. And I think this is really powerful, right? That every form of suffering that exists on the face of the earth, and we're witnessing a lot of that suffering now, injustice, right? Injustice based on race, injustice based on wealth, injustice based on religion, injustice based on a lot of things. All of these are metaphors in our existence, in our physical existence. The ultimate reality and root behind these metaphors is that separation. It appears time and time again, and out of that is born this, paradoxically, beauty. Beauty in sound, beauty in color, beauty in words. Right? Because as Steven Spielberg, one of my favorite film directors of all time, he said that the reason he made movies like Jaws is because he has deep fears of what lies deep under the ocean. And the reason why he made movies like E.T. and Extraterrestrial Encounters of the Third Kind is because he has deep fascination with space and what lives in space. He said, so when I make these movies, I am externalizing my phobias and my fears and my heart. And when I externalize them, I'm able to face my enemy. I'm able to see it in front of me. I am able to turn something that is very enigmatic and ambivalent and ambiguous inside of me, amorphous, it has no shape, it's just this fear that's sitting inside of me. I'm able to turn it into something that's tangible. And when I do that, and on top of that, I share it with my audience. He said, I feel like I am a gladiator and my audience is an army of gladiators and we're going head on to face my deepest enemy. He says, when that happens, all of a sudden, all my fears dissipate. So the reason why art is important, and this is at the core of why we should be grateful for art, the reason art is important is because it allows us to tell our story. It allows us to figure out, it gives us a mechanism of figuring out who, if we are the protagonist of our own stories, it allows us to find out who is our antagonists. Where is our setting? And as we are improvising on the oud or the guitar or the piano or the harp, and as we are singing, as we are painting, as we are doing whatever it is, our craft, we are able to witness, we are sort of We are taking this amorphous, ambivalent, formless enemy inside of us, and we are slowly giving it form. We're placing it in a story. I'm reminded now of, again, we return to Lord of the Rings in the movie, in the prequel trilogy, The Hobbit. There is a really powerful scene where Gandalf and Elrond, who's the head elf, and Lady Galadriel, who, like, they're the top saints of Middle Earth. Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, and then Saruman, who was still good at that point. They face the spirit of Sauron, who had come back to Middle Earth. And Galadriel, she takes light and she points it at his spirit, and she says, "You are formless, voidless, shapeless, nameless." She says, "Go back to the void." Right? And this is the way in which we conquer this darkness that resides inside all of us by shining the light of divine inspiration and creativity upon it. We corner it, we identify it, and then we're able to conquer it by placing it in a story. You know, the idea of the improv, for example, the taqsim, and this exists in all art forms that have improv, is this idea of resolving tension. So, for example, in the oud, if I were to do a taqsim, and you know, I'm doing like taqsim bayati, for example, so here I'm ascending. I established a question. I am not at the root of the maqam, so I am here somewhere in the middle, and this causes tension, and I need to work this tension out, right? So what I can do after that is right? So I've returned to the root of the maqam, which is D, and I've sort of resolved this tension. This is just a very small example. It's actually much more elaborate in full taqsims. And so art gives us this ability, and art seeks those broken hearts. Art seeks those people who are oppressed and facing injustices, and gives them this gift of conquering the oppressor through their art form. This is a really powerful message that Toni Morrison gave in a speech once, and she was addressing her audience, especially African American artists. She was saying, you have to tell your story. She says, this is the one thing they cannot take from you, is your ability to tell your story. Tell your story, tell your story, tell your story, because that's how you conquer the oppressor. And we know from human history that telling stories is what immortalizes civilizations. Civilizations are not immortalized and remembered through their scientific advancements. Our rocket ships and missiles and even medical advancements are not going to be remembered 1,000 years from now. What is going to be remembered is our stories, is the stories we told. What is going to be remembered is our music. What is going to be remembered is our poetry and our colors, our paintings. That is what's going to be remembered. Because it's those forms, it's that art which commemorates our epics. That's what people now are interested in about the past. They want to know the epics. They want to know the struggle between good and evil. Because if we read Gilgamesh, and we read that story, and we read this story, and we see the constant struggle between good and evil over and over again, it helps us to work our own struggles. And this is exactly why movies are magical, for example. This is why movies are so important. This is why movies are so important for example, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and others and Peter Jackson, right, who made these epics, because they give us the mechanism, they give us the motivation to tell our own stories. So for example, for me personally, I have no doubt in my mind or heart or spirit that my entire creativity was born or triggered, the conception of it happened because I lived through the first Gulf War, where I, like Maulana Rumi talking about the reed and the reed bed, I was sort of faced with this dismemberment of my native country of Iraq and my home city of Baghdad, where I remember seeing buildings that I used to visit the day before, and I used to see them, and now they had been disemboweled. The inside has come out, and this very jarring experience, and then followed by diaspora and migration and estrangement and this longing for a past, right? So that's the other thing. For me, nostalgia is really powerful, and it's sort of really my creativity and art in disguise, because the idea of nostalgia is itself paradoxical. You long for a past that you will never be able to revisit. Even if a place exists from your childhood, it is not the same as when you were a child, right? But at the same time, like a self-contradicting historian, we want so bad to know firsthand through direct experience what happened in the past, and yet we do not want to go back to the past, because if we did, history would be irrelevant. So that separation remains essential. And so in other words, art deserves our gratitude because art gives us a way of dealing with contradiction, our existential paradoxes. And actually, art is the only mechanism that we can use to deal with existential paradoxes. There is no other way. Because in order to deal with something, with a reality, with a phenomenon that defies mind and logic and rationality and reason, you need something from a higher realm. You need something that is emanating from a higher state of being. And art is emanating from a supra-rational, supra-logical, supra-reason state of being. It is spiritual. It is a spiritual meaning. It is a spiritual reality. Well, then the question becomes, what should we be grateful for with art? Right? What do we have to be grateful for? Or sorry, how do we show gratitude for art? About 5 years ago, when I was teaching a workshop for youth, for Muslim youth, I was saying that our talents are divine gifts that are given to us, right? And they are the window for us to communicate with God. So every human being, every creation is given a secret envelope that through which they can communicate with their creator. And the best form of gratitude towards that can be shown towards that gift is to cultivate it, is to pursue what your heart is crying for. And to not pursue that gift, to neglect it, is the worst form of lack of gratitude and discontent. And this is important, I think. This definition or this way of looking at gratitude and lack of gratitude is important, because our social reality right now is we have a lot of lack of gratitude. I speak about the Muslim community in North America specifically and in the West, and perhaps it's not true only about Muslims, but I see a lot of young Muslims who are very talented in the arts, and they are made to neglect and to leave behind their craft in the by their community, by their families, by their parents, in the name of religion or in the name of economic sustainability. This idea that you cannot have a livelihood working as an artist. And I think this is a really deep topic, that this is a conversation that needs to happen. I think Muslim artists, or artists in general, because I think it's a problem in our country, in our society generally, that we're not taking care of art and artists very well, right? But there is this idea, for example, in the Muslim community, that any young person who graduates from high school and goes into college, there are very specific paths that they can take, either becoming a doctor or a businessman or a lawyer or an engineer. Because, quite frankly, not in all cases, but in many cases, these are the most affluent career choices. These are the most lucrative career choices. And if it so happens that a person is an artist or artistically inclined, then usually the solution that is given to them by their parents and their uncles and their extended families is, well, art can be your hobby. You become a doctor and then you can pursue art as a hobby. And I think anybody who knows how art works would realize that art cannot be a hobby. I am reminded now of the magnificent Elizabeth Gilbert in her TED Talk, Your Creative Elusive Genius, where she was talking about some artists, creative writers, and the way that creative inspiration comes to them. And she says, one writer said that art, the creative inspiration for a book, comes to me like a train rolling down the hill. It's coming full force at me. And I have to run in time to my house, and I catch it with my pen just before it leaves, and I catch it backwards. The story comes out backwards. That's how creative inspiration arrives. It doesn't arrive when we choose to. You cannot just do art on the weekends. And while I think it is possible that not every person who has an artistic inclination needs to become a full-time artist, I think that does not work for an entire community. An entire community cannot have a bunch of part-time hobby artists. Every community needs full-time artists because they are the consciousness of the society. They are the consciousness of the community. They are their real historians. And if that happens, if a community takes care of its artists, establishing guilds, the Race Karma Project is an example of such an attempt by the community to allow the virtual stage for artists to contribute. If that exists, then the entire community is now receiving the blessing of being grateful, of showing gratitude. If not, then the community is at fault. I believe in the sight of God, and I believe it's a very serious issue because we see what is happening in our world when there isn't enough humanities. If we're not taking care of humanities, we will lack in humanity. So that is the idea of being grateful for art. Individually, we embrace it. Individually, we cultivate it. Communally, we take care of our artists. I pray that these 4 weeks have been beneficial for you as they have been for me and for all the artists and for everybody involved in Race Karma. Please rest assured that this is not the end. The end of this first season is not the end of Race Karma. We will be continuing with our programming, hopefully, God willing, and coming back with much more. We just need your support. We need you to let us know what you thought and where you think we can go in the future. I hope to see many of you again soon on the Race Karma platform. Peace and love. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. That was really beautiful, subhanAllah. We're so blessed to have someone like Dr. Ali on the Raise Karma platform and have him join us this season. So I'm actually just pulling up Dr. Ali as we speak so that he can come answer your questions. So in the meantime, if you have any questions for him, please do send them over so we can talk to him. So just bear with me a minute and we will bring him right over. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. How are you?
I hope everyone can hear you. Give me 1 second. Let me just make sure they can hear you. Sadia says, I'm not ready for this season to end.
I don't think any of us are.
So tell us your reflections. How was the last 4 weeks for you and being on the other side and going through these diseases of the heart through music, which is something you're really passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, as I've told you before, this is Race Karma is important to me personally because this is really the first chance for me to explore spirituality through music. Most of my work has been through creative writing and popular culture and so on and so forth. And it just so happens it comes at the opportune moment for me to really delve into Arabic music as I'm beginning my own journey of becoming a musician, to really also begin talking about the spiritual dimensions of that, which I think is important because every artist is not only a talent, but also a philosophy, right? And I think what Race Karma is doing is highlighting, it's trying to excavate the philosophy behind the artists. One of my dear friends who's a Middle Eastern musician, his name is Firas Izraq, he's from Palestine. He says that every artist is a talent and a stance. So you have to make a stance because people are looking up to you. When all else fails, when politics is corrupt, when unfortunately religious community is not giving us the answers, most people, whether religious or otherwise, they start looking for artists and their views on how to solve problems, to sort of dig beneath the surface. So it's important for artists to be put on the spot, for them to be able to question and discover their philosophy. So from that perspective alone, Race Karma is important. And I think for the platform of the engagement between the audience and the artist is just really priceless. And I think my first hunch before we began is sort of proven and affirmed is that this can go on for decades.
Yes.
It's not something that we can do in 10 seasons. This can keep going and going and going, because if you think about how many books of purification of the heart there are, like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's books that you can go through and just dig deep, right, and explore, and then this is just the beginning. It's like an appetizer for me.
You're telling me. Me too. I'm really going to miss being here and watching you go live. So I have a question for you. How do you respond to people in the Muslim community and even outside the Muslim community? Traditionally it is known, or people assume, that music is haram in Islam, and now you're taking music and you're collaborating it with healing and spiritual healing and Islamic concepts.
how do you rationalize or tell those people what you're actually doing and how it's actually impacting people?
I think there is multiple ways to approach this question. First of all, historically, we know for a fact that Islamic civilization was built upon many pillars. One of them is music. Mm-hmm. So wherever Muslims went, we see a distinct style of music developing. And I'm not talking about just melodies in reciting the Quran or melodies in reciting qasidas, odes, and chants. For example, we have Andalusian music. And as a matter of fact, Andalusian music and musical theory gave us something like the guitar, and gave us something like Spanish music. It developed out of the same region. So the musicians like Ziryab, who came from Baghdad, is credited with working and developing and mastering an instrument like the oud, which is considered the ancestor instrument of the lute and the guitar, and so on and so forth. So historically, the argument that that music is a deterrent to a good Islamic society just doesn't stand. It has no foundation. Secondly, I think even in terms of the tenets of our religion, like for example, the hadith that I mentioned, where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that whoever does not melodiously chant the Quran is not one of us. I think that hadith establishes a maxim, and I'm not a scholar, so I'm not making a fatwa here or issuing an edict.
There are some fatwas you can look up, and if you're interested, I can send them over.
No, sure, of course. But it establishes a principle, the idea that melody in itself is not prohibited. Mm-hmm. Because if you use melody for praising God and for reciting God's word, then it's actually somewhat obligatory in this prophetic hadith. And there are, we can mention someone like Ibn Hazm, who is a Muslim scholar, and he had said that music is allowed. Imam Ghazali also said that music is allowed. We can also say that, I think Imam Ghazali is the one who said that if you want to prohibit music, then prohibit the sounds of the birds, right? Prohibit the sounds of trees. If we're on a windy day, if you open your window just a little bit, you get the sound of the flute. I mean, the flute, the wind instrument, the mechanism of playing a wind instrument is no different than just strong wind going through a very narrow channel.
Yeah.
All we're doing is we're just mimicking the sounds of nature. Mm-hmm. Now, the third thing that I want to say, and I think this is the most important, and I'm speaking now somewhat as an academic. If we read, for example, Professor William Chittick, he has a book called Islamic Love, or Love, the literature on love in Islam. He says in the beginning, if we go back to the time of Imam Ghazali, right, like let's go back to 1100. He says, how many people were students of knowledge, that we would consider students of knowledge? He says, how many people, first of all, lived in Baghdad, where Imam Ghazali taught? He said, not many people. You had to be very wealthy to live in Baghdad. Mm-hmm. You had to be literate in order to be able to read his books, to study his books, and to be a student. Mm-hmm. He said most Muslims were actually farmers and they were illiterate. The point he's making is that it is only in modern times, and I stand by this, and I know many people might be critical of this, of what I'm about to say, but I think it's a modern thing that we resort to jurisprudence to govern every aspect of our life.
Yep.
For an illiterate farmer living out in the middle of nowhere, he can't read books of fiqh to figure out what he can and he cannot do. He's just going to try and make meaning in his life. So what Professor Chiddick says is they used to read and memorize the poetry of Rumi. And they would recite the poetry of Rumi and Hafiz and Attar and Sa'di and all of these poets as they are farming and as they're harvesting, and all of a sudden their life has meaning. And as beneficial as it is that our literacy rate has gone up, I think it is a problem that we begin to govern every aspect of our life as if we are scholars. So these conversations on music, for example, whether music is halal or haram, they were never mainstream conversations happening.
They were debated internally among scholars.
Absolutely. So this was a scholarly debate that used to occur in the courts of the scholars and the courts of the sultans. Everybody on the ground used to play music.
Yeah.
Right?
It was just it was a concept that was considered very complex. And now
Yes.
we've just simplified it because we tend to, let's just open up the Quran and teach ourselves. Let's just open up the Hadith and teach ourselves,
Absolutely.
losing the spiritual meaning of things.
One of my dear friends and teachers, Sheikh Mendez, Muhammad Adiyanka Mendez, I was speaking with him the other day, and he said what our community has done is it has left the traditional way of raising communities by mastering arts and crafts. So Muslims used to become specialized in carpentry, in music, in making musical instruments, in binding books. That was the mastery of the lay people. He said, we have left that behind, and now everybody's trying to become a scholar. Everybody's trying to collect ijazas. Everybody is trying to memorize this text and this text in order to produce meaning. But meaning is not happening, right? It's not happening.
Yeah. I mean, that's very powerful. That is the core of some of the issues we deal with as a community.
Yes.
I mean, we can go on and on about this. It's very unfortunate because there's so much beauty and spirituality that comes with it.
Absolutely.
So what's next for you? I know we're going to continue with Race Karma. We're going to announce very soon what our next plans are. I would like to announce with my artists first tomorrow before I announce live. But outside of Race Karma, what's next for you? What are you up to?
Oh well, I'm still with the oud, still trying to journey with this instrument into a place where I can express myself through it, and just hopefully my long-term hope is to perform with the oud and my creative writing, to have sort of exchange between word and sound, and to see how meaning can sort of fluctuate back and forth between them. I think Race Karma is going to be an indispensable part of that. In terms of,
we hope so.
Because it's like a mirror. For every growing artist, it's a mirror to sort of reflect and reflect back ideas, and see just really the platform to speak them, and to see what comes out as you're doing these sessions is one of the greatest things. I actually want to plug a book that I came across really quickly. It's called The Musical Life.
I'll link it.
Yeah, The Musical Life, I discussed, and How to Live It, by a composer. His name is W.A. Matthew. And I just want to read a couple of sentences, if that's okay, because I just opened a random page, and it's like literally what I was talking about in this session. I just received the book today. So I thought it was a really nice happenstance.
Before you read this sentence, I just want to let the audience know that we're just running 5 minutes behind, and Baraka Blues episode will start right after this. Go ahead.
No. So he says, music might seem to come like a bolt from the blue, but the blue isn't just a nowhere. It's the very sky you've been walking under. What comes out of the blue has already been remembered and forgotten many times. It's just that it's now being remembered in some spiffy new form. But try as you might, you cannot turn these bolts on by your thought waves or by your wanting. And then he says, when you are composing a piece, you are living between the manifest and the non-manifest worlds. Not quite all of you is in either. If you get lost in the blue, your peace will starve. If you feed on too many ideas, too soon your peace will take the form of an obese and stubborn child. To the question, what do you do for inspiration? I say, I live in a good climate and get enough sleep.
Oh, wow.
This is a
Two things
brilliant
I
book.
don't have.
This is a
Subhanallah.
brilliant book.
Subhanallah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ali. And
Thank you.
you're going to be live with us on Sunday. So if you have questions, all our artists will be live with us on Sunday, inshallah. And
Will
now
do.
we're going to go to Baraka Blues episode featuring Dustin.
Gratitude for the blessings in the difficulties.
Yeah. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa shukrulillah. Here with my brother Dustin Kran, director of the Center for Global Muslim Life, and someone who I've known for many years. Alhamdulillah. Want to welcome everybody to Raise Karma in collaboration with Path and Present. And this fourth and final week of the month in which we've been gathering and discussing so much good and so much light, focusing on the heart. And the theme of this week is gratitude. And we are in gratitude for many things. And if I had to list what I'm grateful for, what's on my mind now is that we are in the first of Dhul Hijjah. We are in the first few days of Dhul Hijjah, which is, of course, the first 10 days of this holy month, in which the pilgrims usually set out for Hajj, for Mecca and Medina, although this year, of course, it's very strange that where usually people are coming from all ends of the earth to descend, or rather ascend, to Mecca. This year, all foreigners are barred from entering, and you only have a small group of locals who will be carrying out the rites of the Hajj. And I did some research and looked into this to see if this had ever happened before. And it turns out that throughout Islamic history, throughout the last 1400 years, there had been a handful of times where either because of war or because of plague or other diseases, that the Hajj had essentially been suspended. So it seems like if you go throughout our history, it's happened kind of once every 100 years or so. There's about 10 or 15 examples that I found in history. So that made me feel a little bit at ease, because I was starting to feel like, I was talking to people who were like, has this ever happened? Is this the end of times, right? It's never happened. Well, alhamdulillah, I mean, it's not good that it is happening. I mean, it's Allah's affair, but it's not the first time it's happened. Yet nonetheless, as Imam Zaid mentioned in the live stream that we did today, Hajj of our hearts, even if it was open, the vast majority of believers would not be undertaking the Hajj every year, but yet it is still a time of holiness for the believers. And this is a time where our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, said that acts of worship are multiplied immensely. These are the most sacred days of the year, and especially the day of Arafah, the 9th day. The Prophet said, Hajj is Arafah. And we can get into that, the blessing of that day, where it represents the day of rising, the day of gathering, where the souls come together on the Mount of Arafah to ask for mercy from Allah. So I'm grateful that we're in these blessed days, and I pray that it's a great blessing. And I want to welcome you, Dustin, and ask you first, we'll ask you, what are you feeling grateful for right now? And then secondly, I'd love you to share a little bit about the beautiful program that you have going on these 10 days.
Yeah, man, I'm Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Great to see you as always, my beloved friend. And I think in these times, I'm really grateful just for family. I think I'm reflecting a lot upon how much I miss my family in Colorado. I ordered this hat online so that I could wear it and represent my homeland, my home state. And I miss my family, but at the same time, we've been growing family. You know, I was blessed to get married a year ago, and I adopted 3 young daughters who are 8, 9, or 7, 8, and 10. And we have a new baby on the way, inshallah. And I think just the blessings of that and seeing all of that manifest in the difficulty of these times, right? That, yeah, it's really difficult to work at home, to do all the work that we're trying to accomplish and be here all the time, not be able to go to a cafe and write, not be able to go out with friends and whatever. But I think the blessing of spending so much time with the family, being very intentional about, you know, the family that we're creating together, inshallah, I think that's what I'm grateful for. And I'm grateful for, you know, the need to sit, the need to be in one place, because I think that, you know, we've been all over the world together, you know, Malaysia and Indonesia, and I can't remember, alhamdulillah, all the places that we've been together, right? But to think that now we're not moving, we're not traveling, we're not, you know, we're back to a more traditional life of where we're not always on planes, we're not always moving. And so I think in a lot of ways, it's a moment of great reflection. And even like you were saying, if you look at the last major pandemic, it was almost 100 years ago exactly, right? And like you said, if you look at about every 100 years or so with Hajj, like there were some wars where Hajj was stopped, there were some different things throughout history. If you think about that, every 100 years, maybe Allah is doing some type of reset. And so how do we want to reset ourselves in these times? What's the world that we want to create? And we know that there's also the reality of power in our world, that Allah is the ultimate power. And then there's those people who are plotting behind the scenes. And so we have to be very cognizant of what they're trying to create in our world in the midst of this, and how power will always use really difficult situations to gather even more power and more strength. So
mashallah. No, it's true, man. And I know it's interesting in this time where we aren't able to travel. Actually, you know, a year ago I was in Hadramaut in Tarim, the Dora, in Yemen. And I know you and I were speaking the other day about the fact that you know, those talks of Habib Omar and of the teachers there are being, you know, live streamed now. And we were speaking about a specific program, one of the talks that was about travel. It was about journeying, and the inward journey particularly, and how, you know, because you mentioned we're not able to travel outwardly, but I thought there was a profound analogy that Habib mentioned. He said that people who travel only with worldly intentions, whether they're like, you know, traveling for meetings, for business, or for some other thing, you just enjoyment without a higher transcendent intention, it's like a donkey that travels, or, you know, goes around the mill, you know, in the traditional, the stone mill, and it, you know, it's attached to the mill so that it's grinding up the seeds and making oil. But in reality, even though it walks for miles, it doesn't actually go anywhere. It stays in the same place. But on the other hand, you know, we think about the great, you know, men and women of Allah who didn't travel much. You know, there's people that, you know, Imam Malik never left Medina, you know, and you think about like Rabi al-Adawiyya, she was known to be in khalwa, in retreat, you know, for so much of her time, and people would come to her door and say, Rabia, it's a beautiful day outside, why don't you come out? And she said, there's nothing in the world that's not here. I have something here with me that's not in your world. So this reminds us that there are people that are traveling and traversing great distances in the real true meaning of it, the vertical meaning, the meaning with Allah, because ultimately Allah is the Lord of space and time and not confined by space and time. So the distance from Allah is not physical, but it is the heart. It is the veils of our heart. Allah is not distant from us. He's closer than our jugular vein, but it's us and our state of awareness, which is distant from his presence. So yeah, man, that's really a thought that I've been sitting with, is like, how can we be present and travel now inwardly, and then also and this ties into what you're doing, because you're using a lot of these online platforms to do film festival, to do the, Hajj of the Heart program that you're doing with Launch Good right now, is like, we're actually, interestingly enough, having access to the great teachers and artists and speakers from all around the world that usually we would only get to see every once in a while when they travel to us or we travel to them. So
yeah, I mean, if you think, and I think that's one of the great blessings of this time is someone who's a digital media producer. The digital media producers are usually the people in the, some back room in the office, always working on like video or social media posts or whatever it may be, and we're never at the center of an organization. And even though their work was so foundational and so important, and now every single one of those people have jumped to the center of that organization to say, this is now the most important piece of all the work that we're doing. I mean, there are probably people that were banging down the door for years to put the Dawra online. And maybe it was like, oh, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't, maybe it should be private or whatever. But now, alhamdulillah, here we are open. And when have we ever had a class of Habib Omar translated for the world? That's a full class, 40 days. When have we had Habib Kazem? These great, we have scholars, imams and things in different places, but the great sheikhs of our world, the great, knowers of Allah. And I think that was what's so profound already in just consuming the Dawra when I can, is reflecting on what Habib is teaching. And there was that teaching in particular that really stuck out to me, that there was one hijrah, and that was the hijrah that the Prophet ﷺ made from Mecca to Medina. And now the only hijrah that's open for the rest of time is the hijrah to Allah. And so to know that, like, that's the journey that each of us are undertaking throughout our lives, how do we reflect on that and deepen that reality in these moments? And we know that if we can't break our nafs when we're at home, then we can't break our nafs, right? Like, it's crazy to see how, the bars are closed. And I'm not saying even just the Muslims, I'm saying everybody. The bars are closed. All the fitna literally is closed. Whatever your fitna is, it's closed for the most part. So the only fitna you have is whatever you can create in your home and whatever you can find on the internet. So I think so in reflecting on there's fitna or there's good. And so what we've been trying to do is really bring together the good in the world in these times in digital forms, creating digital conferences and gatherings. Because, alhamdulillah, we've been blessed to know people all over the world. And we also know that there's a lot of people who we don't know all over the world. So now is the opportunity to reach out, to introduce ourselves, to build relationships, and to try to do things together. So with the Center for Global Muslim Life, which is, I remember we had a conversation years ago on Path and Present, right when you were starting. And I was starting at that point, my first company that I called Ummah Wide, and that was a digital media platform. And I think that the Center for Global Muslim Life is a much more deeply intentional, much more fully thought out vision as to what we're trying to do in the world, where we're really trying to impact the culture, create culture and media production, do deep research, create these global convenings. And also we're interested in cultural preservation, because I don't think a lot of people are doing that around the world. So with these global gatherings, what we've done is we've created space where we create as diverse and as global as programs as we can. So with the film festival, we had over 50 films from 17 countries. We had 70 speakers from all over the world. We had people watching in 90 countries. I mean, it was really amazing to see that, yeah, Muslims want to see each other's stories, because the type of Muslim stories that you see in mainstream media are either Islamophobic, so the other, or they are basically Western liberalism, so the self. So the reflection of the other and the self, that's all that's being produced in Hollywood. Whereas what we focused on, as the Quran talks about, is Allah tells the most beautiful stories in his book. So how do we as people reflect that, tell ethical, beautiful stories in times where everything is about anti-heroes, right? So I think that we were able to feature an entire film festival with those beautiful stories from around the world, and show that not only was, and to us, that was just the beginning. Now, how do we do that, like in the space of Hajj? We know that, well, Hajj isn't happening in person. How do we create really diverse global conversations about what's happening in Hajj? And then now we have a couple others coming up, inshallah, in the fall, one focused on social entrepreneurship and global Muslim startups, and another one that we want to do about the Muslim wellness space. and the Muslim wellness centers like Wasat that have been created around the world, inshallah.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, it's an interesting time. And I mean, we're all more connected than ever. I mean, ultimately but it's for good and for evil. I mean, it's for better or worse. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, you know, one of the contemporary Muslim philosophers said that we're still the same human being that had lances and bows and arrows, but now we have hydrogen bombs. Like, our tools are just so much more intense. And so there's almost only so much damage you can do with the lance, you know what I mean? But what you can do with the hydrogen bomb. And I thought about this even with the virus. I mean, because this is for sure the first global pandemic, truly global. You know, it is literally it is in the Hadramaut Valley. People are passing away from it, you know, and every place you can imagine, extremely remote places. But of course, it came first to the major places with major airports because it's the ease of travel. So the benefit of travel is, like, you know, you and I have been blessed to, like, go all through the you know, really, like, areas of Indonesia that no one visits but the locals, and visit the Wali Songo, the great saints there, you know, way off the tourist trap. Really, I mean, we're talking about pilgrimage versus tourism. This was, you know, a sacred pilgrimage, and many other places that we've been blessed to go with the ease of travel, you know, planes, trains, and automobiles, places that would have been extremely difficult to get to previously. However, the downside of that is that everything is connected, and, like, bad things can travel fast, like diseases. But also, as you mentioned, you know, you alluded to, is that, you know, I know you and I have a deep, like, reverence and respect for traditional indigenous cultures, and a sadness that we see that, you know, it's like, since we're talking about Hadramaut, I went there, you know, 15 years ago, and there was just a few paved roads, you know what I mean? And then I went there this last year, and there was literally interim, you know, I saw that, you know, there's boys walking around with, you know, with sagging jeans and sideways hats, because they you know, now they have the internet, and so they're seeing that Western culture. And, you know, it's like, in just a single generation, the disruption can be extreme, you know? And so I think what you're talking about is, like, using the tools. We can't just bury our head in the sand and say, okay, I'm not going to use my computer. I mean, you could, for your own personal self, say, like, I don't want to deal with this. But if we're talking about affecting culture, calling people to light and good, which, you know, is an injunction upon us as followers of the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and our teachers have encouraged us, you have to engage with these mediums. But there's so much darkness in it, and there's so many limitations to it. And I've just been thinking about that, even just around debates and culture wars and cancel culture, and, like, just the difficulty, and now Muslims falling into it, cancel this, you know, cancel that person. And it's like, the medium is a difficulty. But but then when I see people like yourself who are using it for such good, it brings me, you know, a sense of hope, inshallah.
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things, right? One is, let's think of, you know, so much of the media in our world is reflective of great pain and suffering that's at the core of the Western condition. A lot of the media is very nihilistic. You know, people like Jean-Paul Sartre were writing about what that condition was, right? Their European philosophy is directly reflective of just European nihilism and the type of destruction that Europe has created all over the world, right? And so I think so much of that is like the Wali Songo. God willing, any of us could reach close to the states that some of them were able to reach in terms of our personal selves and as transformative selves, but using the tools and the culture of the time to create change. That's why we can't just go in a hole, because so much negativity, so much pain in our world, that we have to spread light and beauty. I mean, and the difficulty of travel too, and even thinking about pandemics, it's important to remember that that probably the largest mass death in history from a pandemic is the founding of this country, right? The founding, the colonization of the Americas, the smallpox epidemic that was unleashed as a form of germ warfare very intentionally by the US government, being one at that time, the US military actually doing it very intentionally with giving blankets infected with smallpox to whole populations of indigenous peoples that were wiped out in continents that we believe at that time had more than 100 million people. Mexico City, what was Mexico City, or Teotihuacan, was the largest city on the earth at that time. And if you think about our time of travel versus that time of travel, and even this week there were articles coming out that showed that the people of the Nusantara, or the archipelago of Southeast Asia and the Philippines, were visiting the Americas, and that those relationships have been there for tens of thousands of years, right, of the Americas, and they don't know which went which way. But it probably was back and forth, because if they were actually in relationship with each other, then they would know how to go across. But then you have this group of people with this set of beliefs that are so dogmatic, and it has to do especially with the state of Christianity and Catholicism at that moment, where they're expelling Jewish and Muslim populations from Spain. We can never forget that that's the moment of the creation of race and the nation state and Western colonization. That's that moment, right, of the expulsion of Muslims and Jews at a genocidal level, as Ramon Gosfugel talks about. And then that genocide comes to the Americas in the form of mass warfare, germ warfare, and then also the enslavement of African peoples at a level of, some have said, is upwards of 100 million people, with the great graveyards literally at the center of the transatlantic slave trade. So for what travel meant, and then that's the birth of our modern world, right? Whereas there was a travel, but there was travel within groups of people around the world who were respectful, who took from each other, who lived with each other. And especially amongst the Muslims, it's really fascinating that the Muslims have been able to travel historically well amongst each other, especially, and amongst other peoples, while having adab and respect. And then you have populations that have no adab, have no respect, and are so dogmatic and believe their own worldview. And the difficulty of the moment we live in is, of course, that's the moment we live in as well, where you have a whole group of white people who believe wholly, like white people will put on the census in these times that they are American, that's where they come from, that they're not from any place in the world, that they wholly believe that they're just white American, that they're not anything else. And realistically, maybe they are, because they're not culturally connected to Europe. They're no longer culturally connected to any ethnicity besides maybe some recipes from passed down for generations, but for the most part, people aren't. So I think the difference it's crazy to see now the stopping of travel and what even it is. And so much of us, I think the difficulty of this moment too, is people just are reflecting on, is it ever going to go back to the way that it was, right? Like, who's to say that the way that things were the way that we were all supposed to be living? And especially with the earth so out of balance, with all these difficulties of these times.
Yeah, mashallah. No, it's true. I mean, I've always thought about this profound, like, historical, almost like irony that, as we learned as school children, that 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It was also 1492 that the last Muslim stronghold, Granada, fell. And the Muslims were expelled or forcibly converted along with the Jews. So, and, I think you touch on this interesting piece that, like, Europe's self-definition was always around that we're not Muslim, which is interesting. I think people don't really necessarily realize that historically, but if you think about it, Europe is essentially a small kind of like, almost like an island, but really a small, the very tip of the kind of Eurasian landmass, surrounded on all sides by Muslims. Like, there was no other but Muslims, right? We forget the Ottomans, and you have North Africa, and you have Spain, and even as the the Muslims went clear to France until Charles Martel pushed back, and into Poland and the East and all the Balkans. So the European identity was really formed around as a cohesive identity, because and this is important, like, as you know, but it's like the Roman Empire, it never conceived itself as European, right? Because it was basically the Mediterranean, because what's now the Levant and North Africa was part of it, and it was then the northern Mediterranean as well. It was just all around they considered those northerners people, most of my ancestors, maybe yours, right? They considered us barbarians and savages, right up there, the Vikings and things like that. And so it was only when the Muslims took most of that they then turned north and kind of consolidated this European identity, which would eventually give birth to whiteness. Interestingly enough, as they move away from a sacred worldview. I mean, our brother Alu Damini has argued really kind of like persuasively to me, really powerfully, is that if you look at European peoples before, they're Christians, so they believe, like many people, in essentially a great chain of being, right? That the God is at the top, then you have the angels, you have the saints, you have the normal humans, right? And then below that you have the animals, plants, and mineral kingdoms, right? They're all connected, right? And so you may look at people that are non-Christians, they may not look at them favorably, but they look at them as potential converts to Christ. They have the same reality. But then when you take God out, right, in the enlightenment, quote unquote enlightenment, and you move into this, you don't just take God out, but you actually replace him with man. And that happens to be like contemporary at the time, European Western man. And then you start to see all other types of human beings in a descending hierarchy from yourself, right? And a lot of our language is still tied into it, right? If you think of, even when we talk about the developing world, it's perpetually the developing world, because the moving goalpost of like the developed or the normalcy is whatever the Western European peoples are at that particular moment in time. It's a strange frame if you even think about it like that. So, I mean, I know this is a lot of your research, especially, in your master's degree, focused around this topic, but I think what you say is really powerful, that even amongst the European peoples, if you think about, a lot of the Crusades, as they went along to the quote unquote Holy Land, they destroyed other European peoples. They destroyed the Eastern Church, the Byzantines, right? And Dr. Omar mentions in his paper, Islam and the Cultural Imperative, that, Marco Polo, the like famed traveler, when he got a few miles out of his homeland, he felt super alienated, like I'm in an alien world. And he wrote about that. But Ibn Battuta, who traveled far greater distances, but is of course not known so much in the West, he travels from North Africa all the way through sub-Saharan Africa, all the way through Turkey, and then Eastern Europe even. Then he travels through all the Middle East, all the way to China, Southeast Asia, right? I mean, India. And in all those places, he finds himself at home, and he's able to converse in Arabic with the educated, and he's actually able to practice law, right, as a faqih, because the sacred law was manifest in all those places. Yet he writes about the extreme difference in cultural manifestation and clothes and dress and food and expressions. It was not a monolith in that sense, but the same sacred universe. And people were traveling in that sense. So, those are just some thoughts. I'm sure you have some reflections on that.
I mean, and this is what happens when you put yourself at the center of the world, right? And I think that a great example of what we're talking about actually is that when the Europeans were approaching Teotihuacan, right, what is now Mexico City, and there's a book that's written by a Spanish scribe right there, where he writes the whole experience of the people that he interviews them and whatever in their languages. And they talk about how they could smell the Europeans coming from hundreds of miles away. And that's directly reflected of that they didn't like bathing because it was seen as an Islamic thing, right? It was seen as something that the Muslims were obsessed with, the bathhouses and the bathing and all these things, that somehow that wasn't to be, you know, to be Christian wasn't that. And so I think it shows what dogmatism can do in our world. And then it goes from one extreme, like you said, you have this extremism in religion, and then you have this huge rejection of that because of how extreme it was. And that's just replaced with extremism that has to do with nationality or has to do with race and what that's created in our world, right? And so I think, and that's a lot of why I think that we as white Muslims, we came to this path, because we see that this is a way for us to take out that difficulty, not only from ourselves, though, these layers of white supremacy, these layers of American nationalism that have been so destructive in our world, take it out from ourselves and transform it, ourselves and our families. I know that my intention when I entered Islam wasn't that I enter Islam. It was that I enter Islam and change the entire trajectory of my family for generations to come, right? That's the level of intentionality we have to have with that, because as we know, Islam everywhere started with one or two people. But we, as the issue with cultural colonization and global cultural colonization is that, you know, that's why these books behind me about this idea of coloniality of power, and I know we talked about that in the first podcast, right, is that the remnants of coloniality or colonialism is like the air that we breathe. And so much of that has to do with the stories that we tell, the narratives that are constructed about us. That like Muslims aren't the only ones that have their narratives being black and white, literally like black and white, good and bad, right? It's so many other people of color communities, majority people of color communities that have faced that within the media space and have had to work to transform how we create media. So like Ava DuVernay is a great example, where she created an entire company to lift up African and African-American film and to change narratives and create stories that are relevant for those populations. We still don't have that really amongst the Muslims. And so that's part of what we're struggling for, right? Is the deep narrative change has to come, or else like you said, you're walking in Tarim, one of the most, you know, culturally intact places on earth, but because people have access to Netflix or whatever they have access to, the internet allows us to access the entire world's trash. Yes. And I mean, it's well known that even like some pornography stats say that, you know, some of the highest watches of pornography in the world are from Muslim majority countries. And so we know that literally like consuming that junk of the Western world is there, right? So how do the only way we transform that is by transforming ourselves. The only way we do that is the deep long-term work. And now we're both, you know, I'm almost getting to the point of being almost 20 years in, 18 years into my journey to Islam. And even we see that it takes that long to begin to truly understand the thing, to understand how we see the Muslim world, you know, understanding that Islam isn't one thing, that this is a multi-civilizational reality. And as Imam Zaid taught us, you know, in those old history classes back at Zaytuna College and these places, is that Islam had great meaning in the world when it had a worldview that was civilizational, a civilizational understanding of itself. And right now we don't have that, because we're cut into nation states, we're chopped into pieces, and even those of us Muslims living in the West, we're told that we have to be American Muslims. We're told that we have to be British Muslims. We're told that we have to be Singaporean Muslims. We're not allowed to have deep care and love for each other. And that's part of what we're trying to change with the Center for Global Muslim Life, is that we have to have that care and love. We know that we have that at the core of our lives anyway, what we call the diaspora of hearts. How do we live into that diaspora of hearts in the moment?
Yeah, and I think, you know, you talk a lot about this idea of decolonizing the hearts and, you know, these decolonial studies, because one of the things that's so profound about our tradition is, like you say, there still are pockets where it is it is really preserved. They're increasingly small pockets, but also because among pre-modern traditions, Islam had such an emphasis on the word and on scholarship and on text. Now, the text was always like that which served as the peg for you to actually learn from a living inheritor. It was not just textual tradition, but there was this great preservation and this focus on libraries and texts and preservation, as well as the oral tradition of commentary, etc. But I think one of these things that I've been thinking a lot about, especially in recent times where, we're talking about like corporate wokeness and the whole Democratic Party, a lot of the left in America, it's really like, okay, obviously representation matters. There's no critique of that, right? The fact that like Obama and his family being in the White House, that has a profound psychological effect on American people. I mean, think about a young Black boy growing up in Southside Chicago and seeing that. That's transformational. So representation is not insignificant. However, if like the corporate interests, Goldman Sachs, they'll be happy to put, someone with a black face or a Muslim or a homosexual or whatever to do their bidding, right? If you can't actually vote against corporate interests or specific interest groups, they don't care. Their bottom line is the same. So it's not really starting to challenge deep framings. And that's one of the things I think about, is that like we have a whole tradition of deep framing, of understanding the nature of existence, the nature of human subjectivity, and the nature of the transcendent source of existence and how it relates to human subjectivity and the cosmos itself. So I think this is one of the, for me, this is like getting to the root of reviving, like real decolonial work is actually transforming the way that we see existence itself and our own selves. So yeah, I know that's a lot of what your work is about. So maybe you could reflect on that.
Well, I think the issue is that not the Democrat-Republican thing is such a disaster because it's two sides of the same coin at a corporate level. And then you have people who are actually now sneaking in, people like Rashida Tlaib, people like Ilhan Omar, some of these people who are more radical and trying to actually create change for people that are sneaking in there that are actually different, right? Whereas the issue is the educational system foundationally, like the great struggle of living in the United States, having children and thinking about where you're going to send them to school, is that the reality is most of the Islamic schools teach the same curriculums that you're going to get in regular public schools, and then they have Islamic studies components. I don't want my children, like in California, people may not know this who haven't lived in California for a long time or aren't from here, but in California, the core of the genocide against indigenous people, which many say is the most complete genocide of any indigenous populations in the Americas, happened in California. It was like total genocide. It happened at the missions. It was literally the Catholic Church going and rounding up indigenous people, like if they weren't converting, killing them often places, right? So that's called the mission system. And it was the mission system that was built all along the coast, all along coastal California. In elementary school, children have to create a mission. They have to like physically create a mission when they're learning about the mission system. And it's just disgusting. Like, why would I want my child doing that at an Islamic school? What does that have to do with our faith, right? We can't just say that we're going to teach Islam and not teach a worldview. That's the big issue here, what we're talking about. Sayyidina Naqib al-Atas, right? He's at the center of everything. Those of you who haven't read him, his understanding of the worldview of Islam means that we have to truly understand what our worldview is, what our Aqidah is, who Allah is, the names of Allah, all of these things. Then how does that manifest itself into the world in unique ways, and in the arts, and in economics and in history, right? This is the way that we should be thinking, rather than saying that we are Westernized Muslims we're Muslims because we pray and whatever, but from a worldview perspective, we're Western.
Yeah.
We're Westernized beings. We're not fully there, right? So from a decolonizing perspective, that's why I say, the term I use, decolonizing the heart, it's about the thousands-year tradition of purifying our heart. But I think it adds to it that we have all these layers of colonization that we have to get through to even get to our hearts. We have to get rid and clear ourselves of so much to even get to our hearts. It's like a giant rock that we're chipping away at, right? That has that stone, that precious stone at the center. That's the reality of what we face in our times. And then the other part of it is that the scientific worldview is so all-encompassing in the entire world now that it's very difficult to say that you'll be anything else. Like you talked about Oludamini, and he talks about the great French Senegalese masterwork, where in this book where they're talking about the first generation that left the Quran schools and that went to France, and where they went on and got a PhD and all the thing, what that meant for those young men versus, like Dr. Ware talks about, the embodied knowledge of what the Quran is for people who study at those schools. And then you have your worldview by studying the Quran from a young age, if you also have the language skills, right? The issue now is that you also have a lot of rote education where it's purely just memorization. It's no longer language studies as well. It's no longer traditional Islamic studies. And so you end up with people who, they might have memorized the Quran, but they don't understand any of it, and they're Westernized beings. So really at its core, what this is about is the decolonization of knowledge and understanding that the decolonization of culture. And I think it's interesting to me that there's this debate amongst a group of Muslim scholars who critique what they call critical race theory. I come out of the multiple degrees in ethnic studies. Critical race theory is actually a legal school of thought. It's from law schools. It's not even from, they're miscategorizing what they're speaking about. Ethnic studies has its roots in people's struggle. Our great sister, Damira Ahmed, may Allah bless her soul, she was from the Lighthouse Mosque. She was a student striker at San Francisco State, the first college of ethnic studies in the United States, in 1968, where they shut down the school for an entire year just so they could get representation. It was about having their histories taught, right? It's not, and so that's what ethnic studies is about. It's about, and then now ethnic studies in its later stages, 40, 50 years later, going into the 50th anniversaries and beyond, now it's beginning to talk about this issue of worldviews, that multiple worldviews are possible, that indigenous worldviews have to be taught, because part of the critique that is correct is that some of the foundational critiques from a theory perspective are tied to Marxism.
Sure.
But they're not. So now it's getting deeper and saying, no, this is about worldview. And there's another book behind me called Another Knowledge is Possible. That's all about how do we actually take the worldview of different peoples around the world seriously. And we as Muslims foundationally have to take our own worldview seriously, or else we'll always be stuck. And you can talk about, it's not just, again, it's cultural economics, the financial systems. These are all Westernized systems that we cut and paste our realities into rather than coming at it from our own worldview.
No, I think that's really beautiful, man. I think that's the important thing, is to really kind of, because if you really think about it, taking it back, if you think about, just take like a major, Muslim city and center of learning like Cairo, right? With its first colonized by the Europeans, immediately what they do, you have a great center of learning like Al-Azhar. You have a great tradition of scholarship, and you have scholars of a range of specializations. You have great philosophers and great mystics and great legal theorists and they're all steeped in the Quranic worldview. They're all, whether they're focusing on natural science or whether they're focusing on medicine or whatever, they went through the same curriculum before they started to specialize, right? So they're deeply steeped in tradition. But of course, what the colonizers do immediately is if they don't outright just destroy those institutions, they defund them and they make sure that they're weakened. And then they create parallel institutions which train essentially an elite class of native individuals who will then do the colonizers' bidding, essentially help them administer the colonial state. And of course, from the perspective of someone under this rule of colonization, if you have the ability to get into these Western schools, it's the best thing you could do as far as guaranteeing your dunya, right? Because you'll get a good paying, well-paying job in the colonial enterprise. And so immediately it sets up this dichotomy that now we're a few hundred years deep in, where there's the traditional learning, the traditional understanding and worldview and methodology. And then there's a whole educated class of Muslims who are educated in Western ways of seeing, Western ways of being, et cetera, et cetera. And interestingly enough, most of the kind of like then like decolonial stuff and more recent like anti-racist stuff, it comes out of that Westernized intelligentsia, right? Not necessarily, who are usually not been studied in the tradition itself. And then those centers of learning that are, you could say like, you know, like Dr. Ware, he mentioned that, you know, Sheikh Ahmadu Bamba, he non-violently fought the French colonizers without even referencing them or their worldview at all. Like he completely was in, like he was just like, yeah, this is just Allah's unfolding. Like I'm gonna deal with this through that vantage point, because of course that's how he experienced existence. And there's a few like, you know, pockets that still preserve these unbroken lineages of traditions for 1400 years in the kind of remote places that didn't have enough natural resources for the colonizers to really care about, like Mauritania or Hadramaut or wherever, you see what I'm saying? So it's like, but there's just frames of seeing things that is like, that has a metaphysical worldview. And kind of, I feel myself like you, you know, very much come out of kind of leftist engagement, but I feel myself increasingly kind of disoriented from a lot of the discourse because of its like materialist critique. It's still trapped in a critique that doesn't take into that doesn't take indigenous metaphysical vantage points seriously. And I think that's a mistake ultimately, because you're still trapped in that, you know, if you have the thesis, then you have the antithesis, you're still, you know, you're caught in that duality where we're talking about something that doesn't even, it looks completely differently at that. So, you know, I think this is, yeah. No.
Yeah, but I think that the way I distinguish that, right, is that I've been very engaged with the faith-rooted left in this country for a long time. And so, and faith-rooted social movements, in my opinion, that's where we as Muslims fit. Like if I'm generally not interested in going to a protest if I know that protest is going to be about people having a photo shoot, right? Like I'll give you a really great example. We were in Occupy Oakland years ago, right? And that was one of the biggest protest movements in the history of the United States. Like this moment is as well. But you had this beautiful day where the entire city of Oakland, you know, one of the most diverse cities in the United States, one of the blackest cities in the United States, where probably 90% people of color, 100,000 plus people go and take over the port of Oakland. And then that night, as the protests continue, this group of white anarchists decide to take over a building downtown. And I was there with a bunch of sisters and hijabis, et cetera, who may not know or may not have been to a lot of protests previously. They're very, very young, and very quickly I told them, let's get out of here. Because they literally took over the building and they all stood out front and they were all like, you know, mean mugging and whatever. It was literally a photo shoot. And then the police storm in, they create a barricade, and the entire thing is like a fight between the anarchists and the police. But I mean, you're putting people's entire lives at risk who are much more vulnerable than you. And that happened throughout these Black Lives Matter protests recently as well, where you have a group of right-wing infiltrators coming into the movement. Like literally there's a video of some of them in Minnesota where this right-wing infiltrator goes and burns down a tire store and several other things. And then you have, you know, several other type of actors within it. But the point is that whereas recently, you know, the work that we've been engaged in here at the border, we created these two border communities called the Border Church and the Border Mosque. And the Border Church has been protesting at the US-Mexico border through prayer and creating space for families who've been separated by this country's long-term. We got to remember, this isn't a short-term immigration problem. They've been there for the last 20 years at this border fence to create space for families to come together. And at that border wall, people have been married there. People see their children for the first time. I saw a couple who danced together through the wall for their 25th wedding anniversary, who hadn't seen each other in nearly 20 years, right? Like in person, but we're able to see each other through that fence. And that's faith-rooted protest that's creating space for families, and I believe doing some of the most important work that there is. Or like recently, I was at one of the only protests I've gone to personally, you know, because, you know, we have an elder in our home and we have to be super careful. And like I said, my wife is pregnant. So we have to be super careful, but I went to a protest where they're trying to literally, this is how insane this country is. They're trying to create more border fence, and the border communities, the indigenous communities, have always lived across this border for hundreds of years. And now even still, there's reservations on both sides. There's representatives on both sides of the border. And so they're literally using dynamite to blow up these rocks. They're in an area where the Kumeyaay people here believe that their ancestors are buried. And the US Border Patrol doesn't care. They're going to blow up that land. They're literally blowing up graves to create space for a border wall, right? So I went there and I was in peaceful protest and prayerful protest with those people. And it was very profound, you know, and I think that even some of the people that have visited with us at the border, at the border fence, is like Imam Omar Suleiman. He reminded us that prayer is protest and protest is prayer. I mean, if you think about the way that we're asking Allah when we're supplicating to Him to transform our lives, to transform our world, and look what happens. We don't know what the power of prayer means. If you have this group of people around the entire world praying for the world to be transformed, does that mean that the United States would stay an empire and that things would always, quote, stay normal? I don't really think so. There's a really profound movie that I saw recently. I think it's called The Elders, and it's about these 8 elders that they found from throughout the world who are these prayer leaders, and they brought them together to pray in New York City. One of them was a Muslim at the United Nations, and they talk about how the United Nations was created on this spiritually significant point, right? That the indigenous people had known about for some time. And they're praying there, and they're praying for this new world. And then, you know, all these prayers, subhanAllah, here we have a new world. What are we going to do with it, right? That's the question. Prayers may not always turn out how we imagine them to turn out.
MashaAllah. Yeah, that's real, man. And I think, alhamdulillah, you know, these moments of constriction and these tests, I mean, one of the beautiful things about our tradition and what our Prophet told us is that, you know, that this world is a realm of test, and there's great light in this world and there's great darkness in this world, and that is how it will be, right? That it's never going to be paradise on earth, but yet we plant seeds of light and of goodness, and even if the sky is fallen in the last day it comes, we keep planting. And that's one of the also, you know, beautiful things about the kind of sacred worldview is like, you do what is right because it is right. You're not even always attached to results, because you see that this affair is in the hands of the one who controls everything. But yet our goal is to align ourselves with truth and righteousness and goodness and light, and to align our words and our actions and our deeds with that. And that means standing, you know, in word and deed and principle and in heart, you know, with the people of goodness and the people of truth, and with the oppressed and the downtrodden, and against those who would harm and do darkness upon the earth. So, you know, I think this is such a beautiful, you know, healing that our tradition has, is this understanding and this metaphysical view of history too, that yes, you have the horizontal history, you have what is manifested in this world, but you have pre-earthly realm and the post-earthly realm, and we have to understand, you can't actually understand this world without that vantage point. So yeah, mashallah.
So one more point on the left, right, is the idea also that it's not, to me, it's never been about the United States left. It's about the global solidarities that people like Malcolm taught us. If you think about one of the most amazing points about Malcolm's end of his life is that he literally is the representative of African Americans to the African Congress, right? That he's doing that global work, that global solidarity. And I think that, you know, one of the great social movements of the 20th and part of the 21st century, the Zapatistas, the way they frame it is debajo y la izquierda es el corazón, right? Below and to the left is the heart, right? And that's the idea that it's not about just being to the left. It's about being below. It's about thinking about those downtrodden and those people who are not representative of all. Like if we can't, if that, and that's what our Prophet ﷺ told us to be, is to think about everybody, to be with everybody, to that every life deserves respect. And so that to me is how I see this worldview. And you can't say that any government in the world is perfect, or, you know, everywhere has problems. And so we're always going to have to, like you said, we don't believe in a purely materialist reality. We believe in the metaphysical realities of our universe playing a part in each of our lives, and that Allah plays is at the center of everything, right? So we can't think that everything will be perfect, but we as individuals can act, and we as groups can act to create as much goodness as we can in the world. And I think that that's at the core of everything that I've tried to create over the last, you know, years since we last talked on this show, right? As in terms of my work with Linda Sarsour and Empower Change, the work that I created within my production studio, Beyond Border Studios, what we're starting now with the Center for Global Muslim Life. And I think people, you know, our community is very, very judgmental. You know, people who are very sincere get thrown under the bus because they may be associated with someone. People have thought of me a certain way because I'm associated with Linda. They've thought of Linda a certain way because of the social movements that she's associated with. When we're just trying to do good, when we're just trying to create transformation in our world, and what crime is that? How is that against our faith? I think people need to worry more about themselves and what they're doing in the world, rather than critiquing people who are trying to create change. I think that's one of the most disgusting things about the community, is that there's so much just backbiting, and if it's not public, it's private, right? It's one of the great difficulties of the Muslims is that we have so much backbiting. It's one of the greatest difficulties of my life as a Muslim, is seeing how bad that is within the community, how much people would speak behind each other's backs, when I know that in other communities I've been a part of, it's not like that, right? And it's excused as an issue of adab, that, oh, well, we wouldn't speak directly to your face because, you know, we wanted to have adab with you. It's like so you'd rather commit, you know, backbiting rather than because you think it's an issue of adab by saying something to my face. Like, say these things to our face, you know, if you have a problem with someone, tell them, don't act, you know, that again, that's a colonized worldview to do these types of things.
No doubt. Yeah, I mean, mashallah, it's true. And yeah, I feel that, man. You know, anyone who tries to do anything in the world, you realize, oh, it's hard to do things in the world. And so I think it should make you humble to not critique so easily. And you know, it seems like, especially with social media, there's a lot of like professional critics.
And a big issue is most people are not institution builders.
Yes.
And very few people know what it takes to build an institution, right? You run an institution now. You've created several institutions. Our teachers are institution builders, Dr. Hatem, Imam Zaid, you know, Habib Omar, you know, Sheikh Mohammed, et cetera, Dr. Omar. what does it actually take to create an institution? How many, especially you're trying to create a nonprofit institution, how many hearts coming together does it take? And yet people would have it's jealousy and envy and hatred that comes through. But like if you want to talk about someone, yeah, go try to do it. Go try to do it yourself.
And it's a short-sightedness too, because there's many fronts. There's a lot of ways to serve. There's a lot of light that we need. So why would I look down at someone else who's doing ultimately good? Or even if it's not what I would do, I still think it's ultimately good. And it's a good thing to do. And so I think just looking with a vaster spirit and is important. Alhamdulillah, man, you've given us a lot of your time. In closing, will you share ways that people can connect with what you're doing, or things you got going on, or your website, etc.?
Yeah, so you can check us out at globalmuslimlife.com. We're at Global Muslim Life all over social media. Yeah, you can reach out to me through those platforms. We have this session, all the sessions from the film festival are still on the website. We have the films of Hajj as part of our monthly film series that we're doing in the next couple of days. We have this Hajj series, Hajj of Our Hearts, going on right now. And like I said, look out for a couple more conferences coming up towards the end of the year, inshallah. That's the Center for Global Muslim Life. And what we're really trying to do is create a new method where we create these gatherings and then create research from it and really try to, and then create media productions that hopefully shift narratives and move us in new directions, inshallah. So that's where you can find me. And then big shout out to yourself for keeping, Path and Present going, one of the greatest, my favorite podcasts on the internet. And big shout out to Raise Karma, to Langston and Amna for building this, right? For being institution builders, for taking the risks that you all are taking by doing what you're doing. And we pray for your success and your tawfiq.
Ameen, ameen.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dustin and Baraka for such beautiful prayers. It was a pleasure being in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore with the both of you just a couple years ago. So thanks for joining us. Okay, we are ready to take it down a notch. So are you with me? We have Danny Darling coming up next, and Violet Life. So really excited. Just sit back and relax because this one's going to be chill. And that is my daughter, so that's my cue to leave.
Welcome. I'm Danny Darling, and this is The Violet Life, coming to you with Raise Karma. We are a collective, and now feeling more like a family of artists, thinkers, believers. And this is a bittersweet episode for me personally because it's our last one. No, fear not. We at Raise Karma are trying to come up with all new, innovative, and creative ways to keep bringing you spiritual and uplifting content. So stay tuned. But for this last episode, the theme is gratitude, and I think it's very fitting. I wanted to talk a little bit about the song I do at the beginning of every episode. It's actually from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and when I was a kid, I loved Sesame Street. I'm aging myself now. When I was a kid, I loved Sesame Street, but when Mr. Rogers came on, it usually meant it was nap time. Just because, not only because his content wasn't quite as exciting as Sesame Street when I was very, very little, but it was also because there was a calming energy around Mr. Rogers in general and around the show. And thinking about what the lyrics to that intro song that he sings, it's all centered around gratitude. So I wanted to highlight that even a little bit more because since this theme is gratitude, I wanted to kind of make it clear that what I think is the most important is to bookend everything with gratitude, whether you're
addressing, negative thoughts or fear of death, or whether you're going through bad times or good times, gratitude is always, always appropriate. And I think it's something that you should lead with and end with. So that's why for my Violet Life segment, I just really wanted to make sure that you always open up with a vibe of gratitude and always end that way. So to begin, we always start with that song. I just wanted to say the lyrics for you before I sing it for one more episode. It says, "It's such a good feeling to know that you're alive. It's such a happy feeling you're growing inside. And when you wake up ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day. It's such a good feeling, a wonderful feeling, a feeling you know that I'll be back when the day is new, and I'll have more ideas for you. And you'll have things you want to talk about. I will too." And it's just, I think, a really, really positive way to open up something like any episode where any theme that we're talking about, when we're talking about things that are more challenging or things that are fun. It's always a good thing. The saying that I really, really love about gratitude is that gratitude makes whatever you have enough. And it's from that point, from that place of knowing that you have and that you are enough, and being grateful for the things that you have, that you can start to expand out. I'd say gratitude, in my opinion, is like a bud of a flower, and then it blooms and you've got all these petals and growth, and it all stems from that one little seed of gratitude. And I think a lot of the good things, I think all of the good things in our lives are rooted in that. So it's such a good feeling to know that you're alive. It's such a happy feeling you're growing inside. And when you wake up ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day. It's such a good feeling, a wonderful feeling, a feeling you know that I'll be back when the day is new, and I'll have more ideas for you, and you'll have things you'll want to talk about. I will too. And when it comes to chakras, 4 episodes is not enough to get through all of the major 7. So I thought, what would be a really fun one to do for our gratitude episode? So I wanted to talk about flow today, rather than one chakra in general. Flow is the connectedness, or when all of your chakras are properly unblocked and charged and ready to go. It's kind of like when you get all your moving parts together and you pull the lever and all the wheels start grinding together and functioning as like one big machine, so to speak. And that's what we are, isn't it? Extraordinary machines. And we function on a physical level, but also spiritual, emotional, etc. And that's why chakras are so important. So today I wanted to show you what I do every morning, which is to charge all 7 of my chakras with sound therapy. And when you charge them all together, you're trying to achieve that great balance between all of them, called flow. Now, chakras originated back as far back as 1400 BC in India. It's written about in the oldest sacred text, the Vedas. And if you have not gotten a chance to really look into them, I recommend it, because it's a great way to at least take time to center your breathing, to check all of the things off the list. Okay, are you feeling connected? Are you feeling grateful? Is your heart feeling open? And I think that it's really important. So what I'm going to do is play you all of the 7 notes, starting with the C for the root chakra, and we're going to play 1 note for each chakra. And what I want you to do is for each one, take a deep breath in, and then release and take a deep breath out. It's that simple. And then as we work through the top, then you should have all of your chakras cleared and charged, and that's how you create flow. Keeps us connected and grounded to our earth. I always like to visualize the color of each chakra as they play the note, which is the note C for the root. The color is red. Next we have the note D for the sacral chakra, which connects us to our creativity, our sensual energy and pleasure. The color is orange. Present. Next we have the note E for the solar plexus. It's located towards beneath your rib cage, beneath your chest. It's about our inner confidence in knowing, our pleasure, but also our self-control. When we talk about taking heed, that's the chakra I believe is the most appropriate. Its color is yellow. this one is my favorite. The heart chakra is located right in the center of your chest. It's important because it connects your lower chakras to your higher chakras and the themes that go with the more physical and present aspects of your existence to your higher understanding. And the heart chakra, I think, is probably the most appropriate singularly for gratitude. It's about reaching out and connecting with others. And I think gratitude is the kind of thing where the more you spread it, the bigger it becomes. And I think it's so directly tied to abundance. Its color is green. To sometimes burn sage too, sometimes in the morning. It's actually got antibacterial qualities, supposedly helps cleanse your space. Some people don't love the smell, but I do. This is the throat chakra, and it's a very important one for me as a vocalist because when it's not aligned, not charged, you're not going to get your best result. And I do believe that that's one of the things I'm put on earth for. So I think my throat chakra has always been something I'm mindful of. The color is blue. Third eye. This connects you to the source, the higher power. It helps with your intuition. This chakra is often blocked by our day-to-day, the influx of social media, information. We're overcharged, we're overloaded with messages, and sometimes it's very hard to get in that quiet space to get the third eye connection. That note is A. And last but definitely not least is the crown chakra, the note B. And that connects our higher self to the source, and it brings all of it together. And once you have all five of them in flow with each other, that's what we call flow, when you have all of your energies aligned. Now keep in mind that you've got a chakra for each organ. They're all throughout your body. So simple things you can do to stay healthy: drink lots of water, stay mindful of what hurts or what feels tired or when you're overdoing it. Those are all things that help with all of your chakras and all the purposes of all of your chakras. And I think the greatest way to get your crown chakra charged and open is to work on all the chakras before it. Now we get a sound for each chakra. And what you're trying to create is that flow, that synergy between all of them, between your whole body. by now you should be feeling very relaxed. And that's as charged as we can get you musically, so hopefully you're feeling some difference there. When it comes to gratitude, I had to start thinking, okay, one of the questions to prompt us was, what does gratitude look like, smell like, feel like, look like? So I started thinking, when I think of like pure gratitude, I think of my daughter Eden. And so Eden means delight. And that's another thing. I think names are so super important in that children grow into what you designate them and what you ordain for them to become through their names. So Eden means like the Garden of Eden, which is a paradise, but it technically means delight. And when she was a baby, it was always, oh, what a delightful baby. I don't think people even use that word often, but with her, like it always kept coming back up. She's always smiling, waving at people. So when Eden was about 4 or 5, she had this ongoing thing for months where every night she'd say, oh, mommy, this is the best day of my life. And I'd be like, oh, is it? She's like, yes. I was like, I thought yesterday was the best day of your life. So she's like, no, today. And she was so excited and grateful. And I think that childlike awe, that almost not having the wherewithal to think about what you don't have or what's missing. And that gratitude was daily. It was like every day she had the grateful attitude, and each day surpassed the next. And I think even though it's a simple image or, anecdote to gratitude, I think it's the perfect one, because if we can tap into that innocent gratitude, that pure gratitude where nothing else is going to come between you and being thankful for what you have, for being happy in that moment, I think we get so much older. I mean, now Eden's 11, and now it's, oh, can I have that phone? Oh, this internet's not working fast enough. And it's like things have changed, and I've seen the progression. But if we can tap into that gratitude that we had when we were very young, and figure out how to carry that with us all of our lives, I think that is the goal. I think that's a great way to kind of center yourself and think, am I in that space right now? And so that's why I want to do this song next, When Mac Was Swimming. It's about a little boy who is experiencing all the gratitude on his birthday. So, which is the ultimate, I think, gratitude day, because people are grateful for you. You're grateful for others on their birthday. When Mac was swimming, I was running late, walking around New Orleans looking for a birthday cake. It was a great surprise to him. So many people came. Nobody knows, darling. Nobody knows how they are loved. Don't worry, my darling. The sun's coming out. Let's get up early now. Dive clear into the day. Let's get out of the car with open arms. Not wait to be embraced. The flowers that bloomed, the things that happened since the day you came. Nobody knows, darling. Nobody knows how they are loved. Don't worry, my darling. The sun's coming out. The sun's coming out. Because the world is right. Love is all, love is you. Because the sky is blue, it makes me cry. Because the sky is Love is such a novelty, a rarely painted masterpiece, a place few people go or ever know. An underwater rocket love, exactly what I'm searching for. You're brave enough to go, tell me so. Say you'll go to Nirvana, will you leave samsara in the words of Dhammapada? Who will lead? Who will follow? Our love will say, in this ark the world could end. Outside our window, let's find forever and write our name in fire on each other's hearts. Love is not a fantasy, a haiku written in Japanese, a word too often used but not believed. Witness the interaction of the flood, the sea, the sky, the dove. Time arose the shore, but not our love. Oh, say you'll go to Nirvana, will you leave samsara, or in the words of Dhammapada, who will lead, who will follow? Our love will say, in this ark the world could end. Outside our window, let's fight forever and write our name in fire on each other's hearts. Our love will say, in this ark the world could end. Outside our window, let's fight forever and write our name in fire on each other's hearts. The world could end today. I will say, in this ark, the world could end. Outside our window, let's fight forever and write our name in fire on each other's hearts. Well, that's all of my time, my darlings, and I'd like to end it the way I usually do, with the ultimate gratitude song by Louis Armstrong. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Take care of yourselves and each other.
I'm touched. I'm so grateful for every single one of you who has joined us throughout this entire journey. It has been an insane 4 weeks, and I'm so grateful for being given the opportunity to see you guys online and create some beauty in my living room, my office, and in others' living rooms. So thank you to all my artists who joined Raise Karma and My Crazy Idea. And Danny, your voice is incredible. I am so emotional, but this is not the end of Raise Karma, guys. Danny is going to be here on Sunday, and she's going to come talk to you. So Sunday is our finale event. If you haven't already, take 1 second to just go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We're live all weekend, and we have lots of really cool things happening, so please join us. We're running a little behind, so I'm going to move forward. But right before I do, I just wanted to thank the biggest supporter of Raise Karma, my husband. Today is our 4-year wedding anniversary, technically 5, but we've gotten married like 3 times. So I want to thank him for everything that he's done to make Raise Karma possible, for supporting us financially, for supporting us with his emotions, for taking care of my daughter who's crying right now while I'm here with you every week live streaming. So thank you so much, Tanya. I love you, and I can't wait to spend many years with you. Okay, next we have Tazeen and Digging Deeper, and this episode's going to be real cool, so stick around.
Welcome, we are live. Welcome to Digging Deeper. I'm your host Tazeen, and this week we have a very, very special episode entitled Art, Identity, and Spirituality. And the title and the topic was decided by this wonderful person, Kamal Ayubi. So maybe you could tell everyone who you are, a little bit about yourself.
Okay, my name's Kamal Ayubi, born in Los Angeles, California.
Oh, you were born in LA? I thought you were from Oakland. Oh, that changes things. that changes things a little bit.
LA. Okay, so yeah, LA.
Okay.
Which that has its own story. But I went to high school. Up till high school, I was in LA.
You were in LA for that long?
Yeah.
Wow, I thought you were Oakland.
All the judgments coming.
I'm not judging. I'm just saying. I'm
I survived.
Just surprised.
Yes. So I went to Fairfax High School when I was in art.
This is Hamida, I think. Hi, Hamida.
I did art in high school, so like visual art.
Oh, okay.
And my mother is a performing artist.
Yeah.
You've met her, and we've done some sessions with her. So
his mom, let me tell you. I mean, I like you, but I really like your mom.
That's normal. Yeah, people love my mom much more than they love me.
I mean, I'm not saying we don't love you, but I'm just saying that
like,
the person who raised you and took care of you, she's very, very special.
She is. She's very special. So I grew up in a cultural arts scene in LA.
Yeah.
Like LA is known for the Hollywood and stuff like that, and the kind of like the gloss. But there's some deep like people in LA, and I grew up in a social, cultural environment of art and cultural art.
Yeah.
So like my mother was part of this Yellow Brotherhood / Yellow Soul movement. The coming out of the, like as Tupac's brother said, we're children of the upside down 60s. No, the children of the 90s, right? They're from the 60s. So coming out of that, my mom kind of wrote music for the social struggles at that time, and people of Asian descent, African descent, Latino descent finding their identity in the midst of the American scene. And so even though my mom kind of came through Hollywood, she ended up getting into this whole exploration of her identity as an Asian American through her art. But she had to kind of go through Hollywood and things like to find it. So anyway, I grew up in that environment. She's Japanese, yeah. So I grew up on a lot of rehearsals. She used to do her rehearsals in a Buddhist temple in South Central Los Angeles.
Wow.
So I spent my time running around the social hall, playing with taiko drums, taking naps during practice, and watching her get local people or people throughout the LA area to get involved with art production. People who weren't dancers doing dance performances through her education and training. So that was like my exposure. So she always kind of pushed art. She's like, oh, you know, I like, art was just there. I also grew up a lot in the Crenshaw district. And in Crenshaw, there's this black district, this district of artists basically.
Yeah.
And there's a gallery called Brockman Gallery, and I kind of grew up around there and around a lot of the poets and musicians of that time in LA. So LA's actually has this Hollywood reputation, but it has this like
but there's
depth.
something.
Yeah, there's depth. There's a lot of depth.
So you came up around just very creative and innovative people. Your mom and like community members in that space.
Absolutely.
Welcome everyone who's on. Farhana's on. Hi Farhana. Oh look, Malika's on. Salam everyone. Alaikum salam.
So then I went to the Bay Area because my mom would send me up to San Francisco as a teenager to work in like youth programs in San Francisco. So I built this relationship as a young person with San Francisco Bay Area, and ended up going to San Francisco State. It's the only school I applied to. I just went with the flow.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I've always kind of just gone with the flow. My mom taught me to just kind of follow. I feel like she taught me to just follow my spirit.
Yeah.
So
I mean, your personality is very much like that.
Right on.
Just easygoing and calm.
My dad is from New York, and he came up in the 50s and 60s in the Nation of Islam. And my in the midst of the whole movement piece of civil and human rights and like kind of post Malcolm X, that's when my parents met in New York and fell in love, and boom, I was born in 1973. My dad died in 74, early 74. But he became Sunni. He was a companion of Malcolm X. So my grandmother knew Malcolm X. She used to critique his talks.
Wow.
You should consider speaking this way.
No way.
Yeah. So my aunt and a lot of my family came through the nation with Malcolm, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, and then when he became Sunni, then my dad also followed along in that pathway. So
you must have grown up hearing all of these really amazing stories of strong people during the 50s and the 60s.
Yes. Exposed to them, conversations about, like art, identity, movement people, so I'm definitely a child of the movement, but still, like, I don't know, I don't feel like I ever really fit into anyone's stereotype, and that because being Japanese and African American, it just put me in this in the United States, just the whole identity issue everyone deals with.
Yeah.
But when you're multi-ethnic, then it becomes real interesting.
How did you, as a young person, sort of deal with those two identities and navigating both of those communities?
Yeah, it varied. I mean, my mother was very intentional about exposing me to kind of like the schools that I went to. I went to this community school, very diverse schools, where we would learn about different cultures and so forth. But it was always, on the playground, an interesting thing. Like when my mom would come pick me up, is that your mom? Because you can't tell, obviously, that I'm Japanese. So is that really your mom? So, and then being in the Japanese Buddhist community, there's definitely like this kind of, I didn't fit, like as a Japanese kid.
Yeah.
And then among the black community, I probably fit in more, but not exactly.
Yeah.
So I've always just kind of like, even the whole thing of how you speak has always been a trip to me. I probably speak a blend of my mother tongue and just the diverse cultures that I spent time around.
That's so interesting too, because people within a certain community tend to base their community or their conception of who fits in that community based on phenotypes and how people look. And it's like, it's not, and I try to teach my students this too, that it's not about how a particular person looks, but it's what do you identify with. And if you identify with things that are the same in this culture, then you're of that culture, like food or language or shared history or whatnot.
Or skateboarding.
Or skateboard, whatever
No,
it is.
I say that because in junior high, I was into skating and I hung out with a lot of Asian kids, white kids, and I caught flack for it. It was like, why, aren't you black?
Yeah.
And it's like, I like to skate, and
But like
these are the kids that skate.
That's not what you're supposed to do.
Right.
And
These are the kids that skate, so I skate. This is what I'm doing. And then when I got into high school, it was like I started loving black women.
I love how you're super shy about that. Your wife is on, so shout out to her because she's an amazing woman.
Absolutely.
Amazing,
so I was like,
woman.
how do I, like, what do black people do? I'm going to join the basketball team, So I tried that, and that was a whole cultural experience of like, you as a young person, I guess it was like, how do I shape into these different interests that I have? And then I got into hip hop, and I would do hip hop dance. So then I was like, that was really where I could, like, basketball was cool, but I wasn't very good. But hip hop, dance, I grew up around dance. I don't know, it just grew on me.
That was just in your blood.
Yeah.
We have some comments, so let's go through these. Someone said, who are your role models? Did you have, to answer this question, did you have any role models at that time that sort of helped you figure out, just with figuring your identity out?
I mean, I had my Uncle Bob. He was a, Japanese American, we're third generation Japanese, fourth generation. So I had, like, my mom had people around who were pretty inspirational, I mean, my mom, for one, she's probably like my first and fourth role model, because I would always see her doing, like, amazing things, like putting on these amazing productions and, like, talking about, like, internment camp experiences through art, writing songs. I would see her writing songs all the time. She would sit at the piano and, like, come up with these songs.
And she still to this day does that.
She still does this to this day. And she works with people based on art, and she uses art as a medium to talk about what's important to her. Like, she did this one piece, it's called Sacred Moon Songs. It was post 9/11, where I was part of her. She would pull me into the productions. So as a child, when breakdancing was big, she would, like, she would put breakdancing, and so I'd do breakdancing. Or when I got into tasawwuf and became, quote, a Sufi, she's like, why don't we, what is this whole 9/11 and how do we figure out how to talk about stories and migration and identity? So I had this conversation with a Buddhist monk. We would just talk about Buddhism and Sufi teachings, Islamic teachings, and we came up with a skit where we're, like, talking on stage about, looking at each other. We're crossing paths and we meet each other.
Okay.
And then we just start talking about identity, and I'm like, yeah, my mother's from Kurume, from this, my family's from Japan. He's like, what, from Japan? What are you talking about? And he was a Japanese Buddhist monk. So, and then we showed, like, the Buddhist meditation and the salat together, transposed, the sajda of the Buddhists and the sajda of the Muslim,
That's so interesting.
Transposed,
That's the thing that amazes me. Go ahead.
And then we talked about, like, bodhisattvas, which are, like, the enlightened beings of Buddhism. These are enlightened figures, like awliya, like saints of Buddhism, bodhisattvas, and the awliya, the saints of the Muslim tradition. Things like this.
That's what amazes me, is that traditions that come with, like, from a spiritual background have so many similarities. It's just a different expression.
Absolutely.
Or a different flavor, if you will.
Absolutely.
Christina said, oh my God, that's so cool. Someone said, how did you become Sufi, brother? What made you think that?
So when I went up to college and I was 17 years old when I went to San Francisco State, and I didn't have a religion. My mother didn't bring me up with a particular religion, except for when everyone has a spirit within them, and when they die, it moves on. That was, like, the only teaching that I was like, yeah, I believe that as a child.
Yeah.
So when I got into the Bay Area, I was really exploring my identity. You know, as a 17-year-old, I'm like, what am I about? You know, because I have affiliation with Matulu Shakur and Tupac Shakur. He was in the Bay Area at that time, and I'm like, well, maybe I'm gonna hook up with them. And but I never really. My life kind of took a different turn.
We're talking about the 80s right now?
We're talking about the 90s, 91.
Okay.
So it's before Tupac, you know, really blew up big. But he was like, oh, am I gonna see him? You know, am I gonna connect with him? But my journey became more interior. I had kind of experiences as a freshman in college that really started to peel off the layers of identity, and I had kind of a crisis of emotion, of perception, but I had enough in me to keep going, not to be hospitalized, but it was like I was very distraught in my first year in college. So it put me on a quest of like trying to find comfort, trying to find what is going on with me. Why am I so like, why is my perception so uncomfortable? And so that led to me thinking through things, exercising, trying to figure stuff out, a little bit of meditation, and then finally a friend of mine, long distance friend, was on the phone. She's like, you don't have faith. Like I had tried all these different avenues, but I never really thought about like.
And she just
faith.
cut to the chase.
Yeah, it's like you don't have faith. So that was like my first spiritual, like conscious spiritual connection with Allah, with God, without any influence of a church or a mosque or any like. I was in a dorm by myself.
Yeah, so like no institutionalized religion or so to speak. It was just.
So that put me on a quest, and my first thing was like, God is good. That was like my first thing. I was like, wow, God is good. Oh my God. Yeah, I was telling everyone, God is good, God is good. And like, people were like.
Did you know him at this time? No, this was later.
So, but then I had to figure out like, okay, I was in this really deep, dark place before this awakening, and then like, how do I stay there? So that became like the whole quest of like, how do I stay in this elevated consciousness? That was like, became my obsession in my first or second year this is like my first year of college. And that led to the study of many teachings, Buddhism, yoga, Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings. He's a Vietnamese Buddhist. I had exposure to my mom's good friend who's a Kundalini yoga teacher. Okay. So we would do yoga. And it was all these like rich experiences. I had like Christ experiences outside of a church, just like, oh, Christ became part of my theology. I was like, I would talk to my ancestors and stuff like, guide me on the way. I want to find the way. And really interesting. I mean, I never worshipped I didn't consider it worship. These were just spiritual figures that were like there. I was conscious. I was like, guide me. And then I ended up being a Muslim when I was about 18 and a half. And she had a book called Principles of Sufism, and it's by Khosrau, Risala of Khosrau. And I looked at the book and I was like, can I be a Sufi? Like if I become Muslim, can I be a Sufi?
Like this is what I want to be.
Had like Quran and Hadith and like saints talking about like all kinds of interesting things like God consciousness and dependence on God. So I was like, I want to. She wasn't like Sufi per se, but she was like, I guess. I'm like,
just like, I guess you can be what you want to be.
Right.
Just take Shahada, brother, and then.
Right. So shortly after that, like I got into the whole quest of Islam, and I didn't find the tasawwuf path right away, but I kind of took a tour of the Bay Area and saw like how different people practiced Islam. How did they practice it in East Oakland at this mosque? How did they practice it through the Worthian community? How did they practice it at the, where all the taxi drivers go and pray their prayers? So I would like just go to all Jamaat Tabligh. Just see what was up. And I started meeting Sufi sheikhs, teachers. Yeah. And I met Sidi Jamal Rifai from Jerusalem. He was like a like this noble figure, like reflecting beauty of God, and I was like, wow, okay, that's real stuff. And then I met my teacher, Sheikh Hisham. Before I took my bay'ah with him, like I met him and I saw him.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, these people are a trip. They're talking about love and they're just like flowing. I was like, okay.
I think that's what draws people towards that too, because on the one hand, like you're seeking God, and you're trying to figure out what are the ritual aspects of faith, and like what are the tenets, and then you find this group that tells you all of those things are encompassed by loving God. Like you do this, but you have this like just overpowering love and joy in that endeavor.
Yeah, it's something to try and revive, because I felt like a lot of Muslims, they always were felt like the underdog, like going against the grain, and it's about the struggle and da-da-da-da, and okay, I respect the struggle, but at the same time, what about like there's a struggle to have joy, like to just like embody joy in spite of whatever's happening. And that was important, and that remains important for me to keep doing it, because there's so many things to worry about and burden our hearts and make us feel heavy.
So what can we do to lighten it?
Exactly.
Let's look at some comments before we move to the next portion. Oh man, you guys are really active today. Thank you for telling us, Sister Stina. We shouldn't ask people if they've seen the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, though, right? It's because it takes away the blessing of seeing him.
If we've seen him, oh, that's an interesting topic.
And she said we act as reminders for one another.
Yeah. Another thing is, before I took my shahada, I had experienced all of these other benefits from different teachings and things, meditation teachings. So I wrote a letter to Allah that, oh Allah, don't let me forget. I'm gonna take shahada, but don't let me forget and put those other traditions that I learned. Don't let me forget those blessings and be like, oh, I'm straight now. So what I found is I always look for the strand of what I learned before in the practice of Islam. I always try to say, oh, that's where meditation, that's where Buddhism is, that's where to find that in Islam over time.
And I think that helps with community too, because instead of ostracizing people or isolating ourselves, we create these bridges with people and say, okay, well, you might have this, you practice in this faith tradition, I practiced in this, but we both have some sort of meditation. So can we get together and do something together? Can we meditate together? Can we reflect together? Can we, whatever it is.
And that's that reflective, I love that word reflection, and I'm glad it's being used more and more, because it's such a dynamic word. It's like thinking about things. What do we actually reflect? Do we reflect depression sometimes, anxiety? Do we reflect beauty? Do we reflect interest? Do we reflect compassion? And to do that those are languages that speak between hearts. People feel when you have love. People feel when you have fear, and that creates community. That creates separation.
It's so interesting because I'm just saying, this said awesome conversation. Thank you. To reflect, your glasses are reflecting this light. And I'm thinking sometimes, when I think of reflection, I think of something that's just in my mind, but it's also reflecting off of what's in front of you. And the important part of reflection has to be not just thinking about something, but actually opening yourself to see something that's in front of you. Perhaps it's in front of you and you're not opening your eyes to see that thing.
Absolutely. That is so someone was talking about the vision, whether or not we should talk about seeing the Prophet ﷺ. And it's okay, there's seeing in this dream state or something where you see a figure, and then there's seeing the Prophet in people, in each other. Wa'alamu anna fikum Rasulullah, and know that in you is the messenger of Allah. There's knowing intellectually, but it's when you feel compassion, that's the mercy. That's the perception of, oh whoa, this person reflects this light from Rasulullah. Which is a deep subject, but it's very important. Perceiving the harmony, perceiving the love that people have within them. That's witnessing. That's witnessing Allah, that's witnessing the messenger.
And I think the beautiful part of that too is that it forces you, not even forces you, but if we think that way, it makes us become people who naturally always give people the benefit of the doubt, or are always looking for that goodness within someone.
Yes.
And if you're always looking for that goodness within someone, it's so much easier to deal with people. I think part of like life's struggle is we get frustrated with people, we get frustrated with situations.
Yes.
We get frustrated because we think we've been wronged.
Oh yeah.
You know.
There's plenty of that. And it's like coming our way through social media. It's coming our way constantly. You know, this sense of opposition and hatred and division. And it's valid to feel upset on a certain level, but then what?
And what do you do with it?
What do I do with it? Some people do things directly with that. I guess in a way for me, the whole thing about healing for me was like being in a state of like, aha, with Allah, like, you know, the creation is everywhere. Like everyone walking around is like this reflection.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if it's like bending down, making the ego tune down, so you just see like, oh, there's presence, you know, and what effect does that have on each other?
Yeah.
You know,
and on one's heart.
We've
got what is your life's motto? And Christina said, yes, Tazeen, I love that concept of reflection.
Love and respect is life's motto. That's what my teacher reflected to me. When I knew that he was my teacher, there was an unspoken love and respect that brought out the best. And so in me, in a flash, that I would have to catch up with throughout the rest of my life. But it was like, psh. So that love and respect is the motto to keep coming back to. If I get down, if I feel I'm going through something difficult, if I'm having family problems, you know, come back to love, come back to respect. It's a quest, because there's times when I may not be even respecting my own being. I may not be loving my own being. So like, that might be a daily thing, because it's society or whatever, that the duality is telling you all the time, you know, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that. And so there's a story that people make up around these forms.
Yeah.
So how do I recognize the form but live also outside of it to witness the possibility and the meaning?
So that you're not limited to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that you, as part of who you are, is you're a spiritual chaplain.
Yep, I'm a chaplain in a hospital.
At in Ann Arbor.
University of Michigan Hospital.
So what are some of the things that you do with patients in terms, I'm sure, like with meditation or whatever it must be within that spiritual care, that I guess gets people to expand and to feel better?
Yeah. So for one, it's like the daily practice of, and everyone's different, but I found for me it's like, okay, I wrote this quote today, like, let's learn how to be dressed with the beautiful names and attributes every morning. Let's learn to get dressed with the beautiful names and attributes every morning. So
I like how you lifted.
Yeah, it's like,
as you did that,
you know, how do I rise up into that through dhikr, through meditation, to see my own stuff, to see my own biases, to see my own access to grind, so to speak. Am I going to take that into a patient's room? Am I going to take that among nurses and doctors?
Yeah.
Or am I going to bring a dress that came upon me, upon my heart, of compassion, love, beauty, and just like go witness that with people? So that's one aspect of it. And it can sometimes, I mean, that's mujahada to me. That's straight like struggle. Like,
I'm sure.
It's like, I want to be mad. No.
Because you might be feeling something.
Sure. Or you see situations where people are going through stuff and you're like, how do I address this and balance the situation? You know, how do we bring balance to a situation?
I think that's the tough part too, is when you're working at the hospital, I'm working at a college, you see stories of people who are really just in situations that are unjust, or situations that they shouldn't be in, or you think that they shouldn't be, you hope that no one would be in that. And so you don't have control over it.
Yeah.
So it's not that you're upset with a person, it's you're upset with a system, you're upset with something greater.
Right.
And managing those emotions and still embodying love and still embodying joy and still embodying hope, I think that is also difficult.
Yeah.
That's a struggle.
So there's this thing that they talked about when I started learning about chaplaincy. They call it theological reflection. And I was like, what is that? What is theological reflection? Because, you know, it's a different language. It's kind of this, chaplaincy has its own language. But I had to kind of like find, what does this mean to, like, for me, it was like reflecting on the beautiful names and attributes. So it's like, when you go into a situation and you see an imbalance, how do you perceive where reality is calling you? So it's like that lens of looking at the whole. Like, there's an imbalance, there's tension, for example, right? You go and there's like tension in a room.
Yeah.
And so you go and you bear witness to, what is that tension saying? What's the story behind that? What's fueling that tension? And then you bear witness on it. You like make shahada on it. You're like, okay,
like, I see this.
Right, I'm witnessing this, right? And how do I honor what's being called forth here?
So how do you?
So so you listen to that heart of the person who's in pain. You try and listen and just like listen for that spark of resilience. Listen for that light and wisdom that might be beneath what's ailing this person. Try and search for that. Let that come to the surface. So it's like you're witnessing layers coming off.
Yeah.
The person's peeling off their layers, honoring their story. Like, what's the story of this person? A person is behaving a certain way. Why? Why?
Yeah.
Is it just about the people around them? Sometimes that's a catalyst to bring it out, but maybe there's more that person's trying to discover. So that's part of it.
What are some of the tools that you use to help them feel relief from that pain that they may be feeling?
It has a lot to do with listening and being present. Like you were talking about the heart earlier, like being present in the heart. You know, zikr, like as Sufis, like it's like Allah says do a lot, or as Muslims, Allah says do a lot of zikr, do a lot, excessive. Why?
Remembrance for anyone.
Remembrance, because if my cup is dry and someone puts something in there, it starts mixing with all kinds of stuff. So like I get burdened more. There needs to be some overflow of awareness so that those things can just start to filter off. It's almost the image of like everyone has this wellspring inside of them, and you're just like helping get the water to flow so that the water becomes clear. If I can do that with another person, then it's healing.
So let's talk a little bit then about our well, I guess this sort of leads into that next portion. So we're talking about today art, identity, and spirituality, and meditation as sort of part and parcel of all of those things.
Yep.
So how can meditation help? I mean, you're talking about dhikr, you're talking about remembrance. How can meditation in general, whatever faith tradition a person may be following, and if you're not, help sort of get that water to flow and get that water to move within you?
Yeah. So meditation is this like amazing broad topic, right? And that's how I usually present it when I'm talking to people about meditation in the hospital, parents and staff. So it's a broad topic. Our whole being, right? We're made of this physical being. When we breathe in and out, there's all these exchange of like energy and gases and things going on. Like we're letting out carbon dioxide, we're bringing in oxygen, right? Our bloodstream is there. The light of our awareness is there. Like our consciousness is there. Our intention is there, right? Whether we're aware of it or not, we may be saying, "Oh, I'm gonna have a bad day today," and just accept it. Like, or we could say, "Well, what's the wisdom of this feeling, and how can I get opportunity out of this feeling, like you were sharing about your
opportunity.
yeah, your class, right?
I was telling him earlier, I had a situation come up in class where some students, I teach Arabic, so some students were a little bit upset. I was playing music from Sudan, and they were questioning what it meant to be Arab and from which region of the world can you be from if you're considered Arab. And it sparked a discussion, and it really got me heated. I was like, in the moment, it happened last week, and you can tell, he could tell you I was really upset by it, but really, but it was an opportunity to come up with a month-long exploration and a project for us to work together as a class to answer those questions of what is making you so upset. In that situation, it had to do with identity. But, you know, what is making you so upset that's saying that I'm from this group and these people are not? You know, what is that in you that wants to separate from this other person? And what is it in that person that's making you feel so defensive about who you are and what your group is about?
Or what group is not a part of your group?
Or what group is not a part of your group?
Yeah. So meditation, a lot of it is like paying attention, right? You have pain, you pay attention to it. Yeah, it's like, okay, I have some sensation going on here. Pay attention to it. What's in there? What's the content? You know, can I write this out? You know, what was your process to start to just like, let's put a magnifying glass on this.
Yeah.
And let it like bring out, you know, opportunity.
Yeah.
So meditation is similar, is that when we're paying attention to our inner being, we're turning the light of our awareness inward, toward the breath, toward the consciousness of the breath moving through the body, toward the heart. And then the heart itself, and in the way that I share it, the heart itself is like, it's like the way it's been shared with me and the way that I share it, it's billions of times stronger than the rational. It has so much energy, so much light, so much information, is actually physically, energetically, and spiritually
Stronger.
coming through the heart.
Wow.
So if you pay attention to that, you're trying to like build literacy about the reality of the heart.
And I think that's important because I think people tend to have this gripe with being emotional versus being rational.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting because if you look at the heart as the strongest organ and stronger than the rational mind or the brain, so to speak, then that means that this organ, you have to learn how to use it. You have to learn what those feelings mean, what that energy means. And I think that sometimes we can be clouded. We might think that we feel a certain way, but it's clouded in something else. And I think it's it must be a science and an art to really be able to know yourself and to reflect and to really understand, why do I feel this? Where is this coming from, and what can I do with it?
Yeah. So, you know, traditionally, is the heart and the mind really separate? People try and make that, and there's volumes about like the heart and the mind and so forth, but very basically, it's like, you know, what do we have in our hearts? What draws us to people? What draws us to ideas and people and situations? You know, and what draws us to certain states of being? Are we paying attention to that? What's on our conscience? Because there's the organ, and then there's the spiritual reality behind what that organ represents. Like there's the Kaaba in Mecca. There's the house of, you know, they say the house of God, but you don't open it and see like, oh, hi God. You know, it's a symbol of a reality of this circle, and what does this thing represent? That circumambulation of this reality, just like your heart, is this central point that the bloodstream is moving in and moving out. So, and then the sun is the same way, and this black hole is the same way. And I say black hole, I like to say it with a W-H-O-L-E, black hole. With the hole.
Tell us the science behind that. We were talking about this a couple nights ago, and I was like, oh.
So some scientists, you know, they reflect on how Well, actually, I've heard from Sheikh Nazim, which is one of our teachers, that these physicists came to him and they're asking him about a black hole. He's like, which one? He's like, every atom has a black hole. Every atom has a black hole. So.
And they were like, wait a second.
Yeah. And he was just smiling. So spirituality and science, like reflecting on creation, right? When we meditate on creation. We meditate on the reality of the heart. We meditate on the bloodstream and the consciousness and all these things.
Yeah.
So there's this vortex that is supposedly pulling things in, but there's also radiance that's coming out from it. So it's not just disappearing. Like energy is only just disappearing into the black hole. Like everyone's afraid to go in.
Yeah.
There's actually like this emanation coming out. So there's information coming into the heart, and there's information radiating out of the heart. And what is the level of consciousness? If we're thinking of love and compassion and beauty, that we're meditating on that attribute of light in the heart, then what is our surrounding? What's the feedback loop? What's being reflected out, and how do we take in? And are we paying attention? So the whole meaning, it's like, you could say it's like the unseen reality of what you see. If your perception and light of your heart is on, then how are you going to see life? How are you going to see people?
Sit back and marinate on that a little bit. How are you going to see people?
Like babies. How are you going to see people? That's a good question. You know, how do we choose to see people? Is it a rational exercise? Sometimes. Sometimes it's a rational exercise. Look at that white person. Look at that black person. Look at that Asian person. And so we'll think about all the details of, you know, what we know in our mind and our ego even. What story did we make up about these people? But then it's like, if you look closer and you look into yourself, or just take it back into yourself, how do I perceive myself? How do I perceive myself?
Which I think should be the first question. How do I perceive myself? And that will probably naturally change how you perceive other people.
Yeah. Am I looking for fault in other people? Why? Because I feel faulty. I'm cracked, I'm broken. So I see faults everywhere. Fault lines. Oh, earthquake coming. Because I'm broken.
Just dropping gems here.
But that's the beauty of meditation. If you see yourself as whole, as like ascending into the light of divine beauty and reality, like if you can conceive of yourself that through your breath, which in fact, in a sense, you are even physically, right? This universe is moving light speed. This galaxy is moving light speed toward a destination.
Yeah.
There's all this powerful energy and beauty being created. But do I give myself and my family opportunity to like tune into that? And musicians do it, poets do it, you know, scientists do it when they get into this state of like connection.
Yeah.
And so I mean, so you might perceive yourself as an unfolding star for like 5 minutes without even having to see it. It's just like you just connect with the reality that like I am a black hole. So that's a whole nother piece of identity.
Yeah.
Like when people say I'm black, is that defined by like white supremacists, or is that defined by the universe and cosmos? Is that like my identity as a black hole, emanating different colors and cultures and beauty?
What meditation, guided meditation or otherwise, examples of things that people can tangibly use to be reflective? Because I think sometimes like we look at this and it's really overwhelming. Like, how do I look at myself? How do I question myself? How do I figure these things out?
Yes. So inside of us, there's this perception that, wow, this makes sense, like knowledge of the self and awareness of the self and so forth. And but sometimes when you sit by yourself, you're sitting there, you're like, well, what am I doing? You know, like, am I meditating or not? And I mean, it's a process. There are many different techniques of different traditions, right? Like you have Buddhist meditation, which is like, might be just observing the breath going in and out, and like yoga, which is moving the body, which is breathing in and breathing out with movement. You have Tai Chi, which is like the movement of the body with intentional, like it combines intention, movement, and awareness, right? So like Salat already like has you covered, really. It's like just people just think, oh, it's my prayers, I gotta do my prayers. He made me do 5 prayers, and it's like this concept of
like I have to do this.
So for me, coming from a meditative like background before I became Muslim, I was like, man, I get to meditate 5 times a day. Yay!
You're like, this is the one for me. Like,
right. So it's this approach of, yeah, I want to burn in the divine light. Salat, yeah. You know, let's go to the burning bush 5 times a day. or let's dip in the Kawthar when we, I'm seeing myself in the Kawthar and drinking, you know.
Yeah.
The physical senses don't know it, but we're reading these surahs, Inna A'tainaka Kawthar, like we provided you the fountain of abundance. So it's like that fountain of abundance, the Prophet ﷺ gave description of what that is. It's like it has pearls on the shore, and it's like sweeter than milk, cooler than ice, and just like, okay, so that gives us a reminder of something that we love. And each one has their own flavor, the way they taste it. First is to think about, okay, there's the form, and then there's like the meaning. So when you're breathing, when you're moving, when you're doing your salat, and in fact, it's up to you. How present do you want to be? I mean, it's up to Allah, but like it's a mirror, right? It's a mirror. Like, do I smile into the mirror? Do I frown into the mirror? Do I surrender my burdens to the mirror? So when you're breathing, the mirror, it's like when I look in the mirror in the morning, am I like,
yeah,
or am I like, Allah, you know,
like excitement, like, just
woo-hoo! You know, but that's something inside. Are we trained and conditioned to like develop this sense that dhikr will automatically lead, but am I reflecting on what I'm remembering? Do I feel worthy to be a receptacle of compassion?
Wow.
Right? So what does that sound like? What does that feel like? What does that taste like? What does it smell like?
Am I worthy to be a receptacle of compassion? And I think the breath can remind you of that. Yes. The fact that you take in new breath every single second or so.
So when you breathe out, it's like the angels are just pulling away burdens. When you breathe in,
new fresh
into the windpipe, into the lungs, the heart, like the lungs are like radiating out this, you know, energy out into the bloodstream. You feel that iron in the body taking the radiance and moving towards the heart, and the heart's like, yes, like it's taking it in, and it's like combining with your intention of love and compassion. You're like, right? And so, and then the heart is first, it's like feeding itself, right? Like the heart itself, it takes that oxygen and it nurtures itself and combines with it. Then it radiates out to every pathway of the body, right? Just to acknowledge that through the heart, going out through the cells, you know, and the cells are in communication. So to appreciate that compassion, that mercy, that love, and then it's like, and that in itself is gonna guide you to something, because mercy doesn't just, it bathes you, but then it's like it washes you, then it's like preparing you to go into another aspect of healing.
Just a couple of seconds of focusing on breathing and I already feel lighter. I just feel just lighter. And it's your insides just feel so good when you focus on the breath. Because you're like, oh man, this oxygen feels so good.
Right.
Yeah.
So the light of awareness, light in itself, light upon light, right? It's light upon light. Like, what is light upon light? You know, that light of awareness. What's our capacity to meditate on light? What's our capacity? We are light, right? I mean, if you believe in science, no. No, but it's spirit. Right? Allah is Nur, and Muhammad is Nur, which is a subject in itself. It's one of my favorite subject. But that light is like our basis, and our remembrance can bring us back to a state of light, and all information is transmitted through light, right? This screen there's light frequencies moving. What about the heart? What about the limbs? What about the hands?
Were this concept of us being made of light, is this similar to Buddhist traditions as well?
Well, the Buddhists that I grew up around, the minister, it's called Pure Land Buddhism, and it's very kind of atheist. So there's just kind of like they're more focused on the nothingness aspect of it, like that all this is actually nothing. So they're trying to like just keep stripping it away. But I feel like Islam gives you like La ilaha illallah. So there's the denial and negation, there's the void, and then there's the fullness. And Buddhism will probably talk about it too. But so it's like the breath in is, the breath out is emptying out, right? The breath in is illallah. So, you know, that's the engagement of the breath in the light.
Said, our remembrance brings us back to a state of light, quote, powerful.
Yes.
Unitarians, Christina says Unitarians believe our souls are light and energy. Interesting. That's your family.
Yeah, everything is light. Everything is light.
Which makes reflection make sense then.
So you, Christina, you are form, then you are meaning, and then within that meaning, these lights come out of awareness that help that meaning unfold. Or that every person's like that. I'm a form, right? I'm black, I'm Japanese, I'm this, I'm that. Then, but is there a meaning in that? Like, then is there a light in the midst of that? You know? Or is it just purely materialistic, like, blah?
I like that you say unfold, because if you think of stars, I feel like stars are constantly unfolding and moving.
Yes.
And if we ourselves are also unfolding, it's like this form is on a journey, but it's the vehicle that's taking what's within us on this journey. So we're constantly unfolding our story and the different layers of our story.
That's right.
And at the same time, part of it is, you know, you don't have control, but part of it is you're creating at the same time. You're creating a story while the part of your story that you don't control is unfolding, like at the same time.
That's the intimacy. That's the immanence. That's the intimacy. It's like creation is happening.
Every moment.
Yeah. And most of the time, I'm like, I gotta get up for work again. I'm gonna see these people. I just create a story that's like,
you created a story.
Right.
Every morning.
I participated in that creation. I am as my servant thinks of me. So it's like, and it's the emotion behind it. These freaking racists, I gotta face them. That's how it feels sometimes, you know? Blah, 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 blah. That society, the stories are just piled on like cake. Like, not tasty cake. I want tasty cake. I want chocolate.
You want Matilda's chocolate cake.
I want carrot cake with vitamin A, nutrients like bursting out of the cake, energy.
You want a banana. Like, that's what you want.
Want cake. Here's some cake, babe. Have some cake, Malika. Tasty cake, fried chicken and cake.
Oh, what a combination. Man, I need more marination, I gotta think.
Yeah.
What are the similarities between Islam and other traditions, religions, beliefs? In kind of a Captain Planet way, with
Captain
with our godlike, with our powers combined or energy light, we make godlike communities. But
So
yeah.
like constellation, right?
Mhm.
It's like constellations what makes the universe. There's stars. There's the black hole with a W unfolding, but then there's these stars that are the forms, right? Planets are the forms that emanated out of the void of creation and light. So like in reality, it's the religions like are like these crystallizations of man-made ideas. But when you connect, that's what I think was unique about the saints and the awliya, like Rumi, for example. Why is he speaking to the hearts of people 1400 or 11 since 1100?
And of all people.
Right, of all people. So there's something behind his words. It's not just like his words. There's life behind it. So Christ, Buddha, Moses, Muhammad, peace be upon them all, is like we read them as stories rather than realities. These are like living realities, right? So when the prophet made Miraj, he's seeing all these prophets, he's seeing all these heavens, they're realities, but we treat them as stories of the past, figments of imagination, or figments of something stagnant in the past, when they're like present realities, and we fall in and out of sleep with that.
Yeah.
You know, we fall in and out of touch with that.
I mean, we've got a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
That relates a lot to poetry and music and art and expression, because whoever the poet is or the artist is, so if you think of Rumi as this amazing artist, creates something, and that thing now has a life even beyond him. It has his light in it.
Yes.
But it now has manifested and has its own light and life.
Yes.
And then that life affects anyone who comes into contact with it. So as an artist, it's really amazing to think that you can create and that thing can manifest and take a different form. And so any last minute thoughts on all of these things we've been talking about?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
So my father was a drummer, conga drummer, and I took some conga classes, but I like to I don't drum that much, but Joe, who is part of Divine Providence, just made mention of, you know, he just thought it was cool that what's the brother's name that were violent? Aaron and I were jamming, and I'm not here to like perform or anything, but just to express, you know, it's like intention, movement, sound, right? The drum is there's reflection in everything, so there's meditation in everything. It may be partially the drum that you just have an intention. So we're gonna play something. Bismillah. Breathing in, breathing out. Universes and stars producing, reflecting, moving through time and space. Every moment a meditation, widening the perceptions through the contractions. Divine love, heavenly satisfactions descending upon your bloodstream. You annihilate into the light. You come back ready to unite. Take your mind, insert it into the heart. The awareness begins, it starts. Be happy with what you're given. Infinitude in what you're living. So these are some words to share reflection that you will sustain divine connection.
Oh!
Meditation. Yeah, I really appreciate you. I appreciate you and Ismail and Divine Providence and all the people that you are in contact with. I'm happy to just be also in this exchange. Let's just continue and build on the beautiful names. What do we wake up in the morning, get dressed in the beautiful names and attributes. And when we go to sleep, we may feel happy or blissful, we may feel burdened. Give it back to the ocean we go back to that ocean, surrender that ocean together. I hope we'll be happy. And that the burdens will be lightened on humanity, and that these coming days that come, there may be heaviness there, but what is the opportunity? What's the opportunity that's embedded in our lives and the extremes that happen in the world? There's something to be extracted. And maybe a lot of the big unwrapping of the gift is, as a chaplain, we see people leaving this earth. It's a big unveiling, but why wait? You know, search now. Start unwrapping now. It's infinite unwrapping. So
always unwrapping, always unfolding. It's like unwrapping this present.
Yep.
But it's constant.
Yep.
It's constant presence.
Yes.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, this was Kamal Ayubi. You can find him, some of his meditations and whatnot online, so I will post that.
And we'll continue. We're going to continue making more meditations, hopefully, with Ismail and other artists, and just promote reflection, reflective culture. Yeah. You know, if this country, if this land has a medicine, I think it's reflection. I think because reflection is infinite.
I think so too.
And then it's growing among people, among other people. Maybe it's not growing. What are you going to do?
But I mean, we can continue it for ourselves. Yeah. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. And you can find him on Lufuki and Divine Providence, our album that's coming up. He did the poetry that's on it. You did such a beautiful job really embodying the meanings of the songs. So I'm really excited to share that because they're really beautiful.
Thank you.
With that was another successful episode, alhamdulillah, of Digging Deeper.
Wow, you guys, that was an incredible talk. I'm still I have no words. That's why I had to go to a weekly intro video instead. Thank you guys so much for following us. As you know, we are in week 4, day 1, so we have 3 more days. And we would love to hear from you. Tell us how you're liking our Raise Karma program. We really appreciate you guys being part of our journeys and taking a peek into our hearts and letting us take a peek into your hearts. If you haven't already, please subscribe so you can see the last 3 episodes that we have left for this, I think might be this year, but we will see. We need your support. We need to prove that this is actually making an impact, so please subscribe. If you're not following us on Instagram, please do so. And if you already are, then share. If you're enjoying, if you're benefiting, if there's anything you can do, share with your friends, your family. Ask them to come along. 3 more days, guys. So we would love to be in this journey with you. And with that, we will go into Medina's song and then call it a night. Assalamu alaikum.
Straight to the left, your hand held high as though in self-defense. Is it possible that we used to connect wirelessly? Now our whole world's come in between, it don't make sense. I want to see how it feels when I turn off the screen. What does it mean to be here in life? Something so sweet about those scenes most rush to delete. Why don't we meet where the sunshine fills our eyes, where the crickets serenade us as we sip in lemonade and breathe the heat on pines and watch the evening fade. And we won't miss all our mirrors, 'cause this is more than glass can give us. Surely this is where our stories all get made. Oh, I'm scared of growing numb. I thought we were close, but when I needed you the most, my heart's a button underneath your thumb. I want to see how it feels when I turn off the screen. What does it mean to be here in real life? Something so sweet about those scenes most rush to delete. Why don't we meet where there's no room for disguise, where the flowers smell real and the rain wets our hair, and we muddy our dresses, but it's boring to care, and let our followers all ditch us when they don't see any new pictures, 'cause this feeling is too good for us to share. Oh, hand to hand like old times, 'cause I'm too old school to take these changes in my stride. I know we can connect ways are much more direct. Why don't we meet out here in real life? Real life.